Is there any discussion? So all those in favor of affirming the superintendent's recommendation, would you have a show of hands? We've got, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5. We've got 5. And those opposed? Bill? And those abstaining? Evelyn, Betsy, and Brian. Does that pass? Yes.
Motion passes.
Item 3, school self-assessment, anti-bullying, Bill of Rights Act. This is a consent item. Do I do a motion? No, I'm just reading that. If there's any discussion? Okay, we'll move on. On to my report. So, welcome to the September 24th regular meeting of the Board of Education of the Princeton Public Schools. We appreciate your joining us tonight as we start the school year with our regular board business, as well as an update on referendum projects, approval of annual goals, and the consideration of a planning firm to help us find a financially feasible, mission-driven solution to enrollment growth. In September, the board continued to build and deepen relationships with community partners, meeting with the municipality to kick off a review of shared services by an outside nonprofit consultant, and separately with municipal leaders for a quarterly check-in on shared interests, and also with the Princeton Charter School and the Institute for Advanced Study. In addition, we are looking forward to participating together with the leadership from our 3 unions in a collaborative program sponsored by Rutgers, the New Jersey School Board Association, state union leadership, and the associations of superintendents and principals in November. And in the interim, we have invited our 3 associations to join in our planning efforts, as well as participation on our policy committee. Just a quick word on the board, district, and superintendent goals that are on our consent agenda tonight. These goals flow from our mission and are aligned around student achievement, financial sustainability, and multi-year facilities planning. Our board is focused specifically on evidence-based decision-making, communication, collaboration, and transparency, and increased committee effectiveness. We plan to hold several public workshops on key issues, including financial, long-term planning, and facilities issues. The board and superintendent developed these goals together this past summer and discussed them in detail at our August 27th meeting. We are excited to move forward as a team with our administrators, educators, and staff in executing on these goals on behalf of each and every one of our current and future students. In keeping with our goals around evidence-based decision-making, community collaboration, and multi-year financial and facilities planning, we will be hearing tonight from Bob Powell, a community member and recognized expert on school impact of residential development. Bob chairs our ad hoc Strategic Advisory Committee on Growth and Development, a group of community members with expertise in planning, policy, and real estate development, convened earlier this year to advise the board on challenges posed by continued residential growth in Princeton. The committee, together with a site planning committee that represented our other standing board committees, considered our current school enrollment situation, school impact data, and trends in growth. The advisory committee recommended the hiring of a planning firm to validate existing and new data. Then, after an RFP was issued by the district, assisted the district review committee consisting of board and administrative representatives in interviewing firms, and has recommended the firm of Milone and McBroom, which presented to the full board and the public on September 10th and is under consideration for appointment on tonight's agenda. Before I turn it over to Steve, I just want to mention that Jess Deutsch, who is going to join us momentarily, I hope, has suggested and introduced to us the idea of having a gratitude moment. And I'm actually thinking we'll hold that until she comes, and so if we need a break in some of our more serious discussions later, we can take a moment for gratitude. So we may come back to that when Jess joins us. Steve, would you like to take it from here?
Thank you, Beth. Good evening, everyone, and everyone watching at home. In the spirit of gratitude tonight, I want to begin by thanking all of our staff for their incredible and ongoing efforts to ensure our school year opens as smoothly as possible for all of our students. Our theme for this year, as I mentioned last week, is knowing every child, supporting them together. That theme was beautifully evidenced in the back-to-school nights we had 2 weeks ago at our elementary schools and last week at JW Middle School. Parents, administrators, and teachers came together to talk about our kids and the goals that we share for them. Back to school night for our high school will be this Thursday night at 7 p.m. and we look forward to that event generating the same joy and collaboration as the previous back to school nights. Turning now to our referendum. I'd like to reaffirm my gratitude to our entire community for their approval last December of $26.9 million to address the most urgent facility needs in our schools. Those needs relate directly to the health, wellness, safety, and security of our students and our staff. The projects approved through the referendum touch all 6 of our schools and range from the installation of HVAC, to the construction of security vestibules, to the redesign of the guidance and fitness areas at PHS and the nurses area at JW, to the development of collaborative spaces at the middle school and high school, which help to reduce the overcrowding in those buildings and are also consistent with best practices of 21st century learning. In accepting the responsibility of implementing the referendum projects, we as a board and as an administrative team made a commitment to the community that we would regularly provide public updates on our progress. Tonight is an opportunity to do just that. Scott Downey, our architect from Spiesel, will walk us through where we are with the implementation of the various projects and where we are headed next. He'll be joined by Kathy Tartaglia from Epic, our construction management firm. And just before Scott begins, I want to thank our building principals. I see Mark Shelley is here tonight. And all of the building principals and all of the referendum review teams, as well as Tim Charleston, our school safety specialist, all of whom met regularly with Scott to develop the designs of the various spaces about which we will be talking tonight. I also want to express my gratitude to Matt Bolden, our new business administrator, who began with us the end of August, so not quite a month, and to Dave Harding, our new director of facilities, who began with us on July 1st. Both of them have truly jumped in with both feet, running fast, to understand and manage the myriad of details associated with these referendum projects. You'll hear from Matt at the end of the presentation tonight as he provides us with a quick cost analysis and update, and you can hear from Dave at our meeting on October 15th when he'll do a quick presentation regarding all of the facilities work in addition to the referendum projects that's gone on in the summer and that continues throughout the year. So, Scott, if you wouldn't mind, we welcome you back tonight to share where we are with the referendum projects and where we're headed next.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of an update on the projects that have been underway this summer, as well as talking about the next steps and how we're going to move forward with the balance of the program. So starting with the work that has been underway, Riverside, we've been making improvements at Riverside to add air conditioning in the classrooms and upgrade the electrical system there at the school. This project was on a very tight schedule because of some issues we had early on with the initial bids, but it did move well through the summer. The units are in, the units are operating. The job is being finished currently with the final casework being installed around the units as well. We also did work related to electrical upgrades at the other 3 elementary schools. The initial phase of this work was done. Right now, we are in a process with PSE&G, the utility. The utility has to determine what they want done with some transformers, and this is there are requirements that PSE&G has, and the transformer switchover will occur at this point probably in the spring. So we'll be working out the final details, and then that final changeover for the electrical system will happen in the spring during a break. At the Princeton High School, the gymnasium, air conditioning is installed, is operating, and that project in particular, we were in a position to be able to finish that about 6 weeks ahead of the original schedule the contractor gave us, which was very good news. So that air conditioning was in place at start of school, as opposed to us talking about it coming into play in the next couple of weeks. So that was a nice benefit. Speaking of which, here is a picture, beautiful picture of the gym. Doesn't look substantially different, but in the ceiling, if you're in the gym, you will see the blue ducts that run and deliver that air conditioning into the space. hopefully keeping everybody very cool, even during the most exciting games. So that is a minor change in the appearance of the space, but a nice change in terms of performance, in terms of wellness, and in terms of the ability to utilize that space for broader activities, even during the shoulder and the hotter seasons of the year now. At Riverside, this is an image of one of the classrooms and a couple of smaller images to the bottom. So the air conditioning unit is this vertical unit right here that all of them fit in fairly nicely into the classrooms. They have a vent that goes directly to the outside. The soffit work you see here in this room is where the ductwork, again, delivers the air conditioning to that space. And I think these units fit in well. The casework around them, which is what you see beginning to be installed here along the windows, that is what is still being put in place. And again, units are operating, as we understand, keeping things cool and in good shape there as well. So those were the three primary projects that were done this summer. Now, as we move forward, there's still a lot more work to do. Now, one of the things we discussed early on in Riverside being the initial school that was going to receive the air conditioning was that, number one, it gave us the opportunity to explore how these units were truly going to work, get some people some exposure to them, and learn the lessons along the way as to what might have gone well and might not have gone well. So there were certainly some challenges with construction. That's actually the definition of construction. It's called challenges, and it does happen, and we did have some challenges, but we also took very careful note of them. So some of those challenges involved schedule. We will be looking to bid the next air conditioning projects coming up fairly soon in the fall, giving us a much more comfortable schedule for their implementation. We will be looking at doing some of the ductwork differently, eliminating some of the drywall soffits, which produced some dust and created some construction challenges along the way, and incorporating some other design changes that we were able to realize made a lot of sense out of this initial installation. So we will be applying those lessons moving forward and hopefully benefit from those changes as those projects advance. Kathy, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to the list?
I think we'll be a little more careful about packing up before school gets out. Teachers' supplies and things, get boxed up, and so that we don't have to worry about contractors being too careful, because that gets.
Right. We've talked a fair amount about that, about making it easier for the teachers to pack up their things and then unpack again as construction wraps up. So those and other changes that we'll be incorporating into the next set of documents should keep things moving fairly smoothly. So future projects. So what is on the horizon? Well, the next project that would be going to bid would be door and hardware upgrades at the various elementary schools. This also includes vestibule improvements. So the schools have already been integrated with the lobby guard system. That system will integrate with the vestibule improvements that will be undertaken. The door and hardware improvements will include addressing some doors that are problematic. It'll include improving lockdown functions and general security functions throughout the schools. At the middle school, we have air conditioning upgrades. We also have the renovation of the ACC, the old library space. So this was a space that was used through the media commons for large groups primarily on occasion. And the renovation of this space will offer an opportunity to do a couple of things. Number one, it will allow us to provide additional capacity. So the additional capacity through the improvements that we're going to make, and I'll show you in a moment, will potentially help the district address about half of the overcapacity situation there at the middle school. It will also allow us to begin bridging toward the type of space that the superintendent described and that we had explored with some of the earlier designs for the 5-6 concept in the high school, namely to move to educational spaces that are more responsive in many ways to the way the teachers are teaching in the middle school and in the other schools. Spaces that are flexible, that allow students to work independently and in groups, and teachers work with them in different ways. Make those spaces flexible as opposed to forcing the teaching to be flexible around the spaces that are put in place. So that will be taking place at the middle school. At Princeton High School, We have improvements. We're adding a second floor in the fitness center. We're adding a small addition on the building, and again, I'll illustrate this shortly. Improvements to guidance, electrical, and some infrastructure upgrades there as well. Drainage improvements around the site to help with water management and other things, as well as field improvements and bathroom facilities outside, water access at the fields, and so forth. So right now, the high school would be the project. First, the door and hardware, then JW will be bid, then the high school will follow. Little Brook Library, we have money in the budget to make improvements there, and we're planning to probably bid that with the high school project at this point. So I apologize, these are actually a little hard to see, but the schedule's here outlined. So the door and vestibule project is scheduled to go to bid beginning of next week. Bids would come in early November, targeting an award, assuming we're in good shape to do so, at the November board meeting. The JW Middle School project would bid slightly after that, and again, hopefully in a position to award that project at the November board meeting, November 19th. The air conditioning in the other elementary schools, we're discussing this. The goal is to move this forward and begin spreading that air conditioning around the other facilities. Exactly what the schedule will be at each school, we're in the process of fine-tuning that. But these projects would begin to bid in November with possible award in December. And then the high school project would follow with bidding in December and a goal of making award in January, assuming that we have bids in good shape. Are we passing notes in class? So to take you through in a little more detail of what's going on with some of these projects. So this is an image of the layout for the renovation at the ACC at the middle school. So the area you see occupied by these spaces is right now pretty much a large open area. There are some partial height areas along the sides. This was the old library, so you had stacks and some interstitial floor spaces. So this area will be renovated so that this series of rooms can be used educationally, can be used in ways that can be, those spaces can be combined, and large groups or multi-groups can work together in different ways. The nurses area, the health area next to it, and the entry vestibule will also be renovated as part of this project. So this mixture of classrooms, they can serve as regular classrooms if desired or needed to do so. But they also have a series of features, so movable walls, allowing these two rooms to work together. Same thing here, allowing the larger space in this classroom to work together for large group activities. There's a small group room. And again, the ability to move furniture and intermingle the activities in these spaces so that kids and teachers can adapt the spaces to the activities that they are teaching and learning, as opposed to being forced to adapt those activities to the limited spaces that are determined by fixed walls and corridors. This includes the ability to have a flexible space, so marker surfaces around the room in terms of the wall space and the casework. So trying to get away from a room which has a single front to a room which can be used in 3 or 4 different orientations in a lot of different ways, again, to maximize what can occur there and increase that flexibility. This just shows you some of the ceiling features, some drop features, additional lighting, and so forth that would be part of these concepts. Some of the lights you see in these layouts are existing lights that are being reused, so we are recapturing some of the material that is present in that space right now. Some finishes, floor logo, various finishes. We've actually been through a series of exercises in terms of refining these finishes with the team at the middle school, and this is currently where the status of that stands that we're moving forward with. And then, as I mentioned, combining, casework that you would normally have in the room with writable surfaces. So these surfaces would allow ad hoc use as marker boards and activity areas, and a lot more surface that can be used for ongoing learning and teaching activities in these rooms. In the nurses suite, a variety of changes. So right now, the nurses suite at JW is arguably inadequate, very tiny, limited space. So we're adding several cot areas, an exam room, the ability to have an adequately supported nurses area, the ability to supervise these various spaces, and access to bathrooms and so forth will be part of this change. And this is all happening within existing space at the school. So one of the other things that is happening at the school is right now the commons area outside of the media commons, between the media commons and the auditorium, is a nice big space. Kids are often gathered in there. If you've ever been in that space, when kids are in that space, it's also an incredibly loud space. Acoustically, it's terrible. And as a result, it is actually a nice usable space that can work for large groups and large activities in the school, but it just cannot function in that way because of the poor acoustics there. So we did an acoustic analysis of that space. We had included a budget to do some upgrades. The diagram you see here is that analysis. So the green segment in the bottom, to put it simply, is really where you want to be acoustically and in terms of reverberation. The red line is where that space is, so not ideal. In the end, the proposed line here at the bottom, the dotted brown line, will be the result with the changes that we're improving. So that will include primarily the yellow area at the ceiling will be treated with an insulation material that will cut down on the reverberation, provide acoustic enhancements in this space. And the intention is that we will be adding another large space to the school that right now is there physically but can't really be used effectively. So trying to maximize the space that is available for teaching and learning and different activities in the school. We will also be bidding an alternate with that project to see if we can afford to replace the lights as well as part of that project. Then at the high school, so the general overview at the high school is that the fitness center right now is a large old gym space, high bay space. We're putting in a partial interstitial floor, again, trying to maximize what we can get out of the space that's there and minimize the addition on that building because that building is challenged in terms of the site. Very limited space around it, limited parking, limited fields. So the additions in this case are happening effectively within the existing footprint. We're adding a partial second floor within the fitness center. And we're adding an addition over what is right now a one-story portion of the building right here. So without increasing the footprint of the building, we are increasing the capacity, and we're also providing a range of flexible spaces here as well, just as we are at the middle school. And just as we are at the middle school, the additional capacity here should allow the high school to program in a way that addresses probably about half of the current overcapacity situation at that building. And that includes flexible classroom spaces. It includes a flexible commons space that will work with those areas and be able to use itself, be used itself as a learning space. And then an additional space on the second floor here that's being added, which will provide physical education, aerobic, yoga, space for fencing. There will be space for wrestling between that and the first floor, the fitness center activities, dance, and various other things to occur. So through that increased amount of space, we're allowing those programs to have more space to work and for the school to be able to program those areas more actively. So this is an image of the elevation. So we've shown some images of the elevation concepts early on. The initial approach to this building, appreciating that it has a very traditional look. This is I apologize, I don't have a key plan here to orient you, but this is the elevation that faces the neighbors. The main entrance is over here to the right. Our addition, this is the first floor area, and our addition is going over top of that. So there's patterning in the existing building in terms of the pilasters and the windows and so forth that exist on that elevation, which we are trying to carry over to the new building and pick up on some of those cues visually. Keep it fairly simple so it doesn't compete, but so that it fits in with the building that's there. Now, as you round the corner, this area gets set back, and that's where the last addition on the building goes. I know there are some strong feelings about how that addition looks, but however you feel about it, that addition has a more modern look than the traditional side of the building. Our addition happens right between those two. So as we turn the corner, we're trying to, number one, carry this language around, and number two, try to fit in a little bit with now this other part of the building that it sits next to. So our goal in these elevations is to try and create this small addition, the second floor addition, but do it in a way that fits in fairly compatibly with the different looks on that particular corner of the building, and again, without adding space to the footprint. Three-dimensionally, this is that area here. So the main entrance and court is right up here. This is along the side where guidance and so forth exists currently. This is the first floor that we're adding on top of. Within the sloped roof, which we're using to echo the sloped roofs on the building, we're also using that space to enclose some mechanical equipment. And then this area here, there is a small addition here, which is the egress stair that gets added as part of this work as we wrap the corner. And so three-dimensionally, this is the concept of how this addition will look. So we still have some more development. There's still a lot more detail to be worked into this, and we'll be back to show you more as we advance that over the next couple of months. The guidance area is being redone at the school right now. If you've ever spent any time in guidance, it is generally cramped. There's not enough space. There's not enough privacy for some of the activities that occur in that space. And so we're trying to reconfigure to, number one, provide the offices and the types of spaces that are needed. Number two, create a hierarchy that allows some of that privacy to be introduced into that space when the situations merit it. So there are two different areas here. There's this most public area and then a secondary area here that can be used to isolate students and parents if that's the case that needs to occur. If you have a student and their neighbor's parents might be coming in for another activity, sometimes there is a need for some privacy around those types of visits. So by setting it up in a series of stages, we're going to give the school the ability to create those levels of privacy when needed. Also, the various offices and spaces that occur in here are of different sizes. Some right now are not large enough to have meetings with students in the offices where people sit. So some of them are larger, so some of those meetings can occur there. We also have a series of conference rooms and meeting spaces of different sizes that can be combined in different ways. So when a large activity like a college coming in for an orientation is to occur, there's a space for that. There are also spaces for more simultaneous meetings and activities to happen than currently can be accommodated. So this renovation, again, takes place within the existing guidance space at the school. And then outside, there are some various improvements. I mentioned drainage, the drainage area that's over to the side over here. We're making some improvements, expanding the drainage area that sits right here next to the parking lot so that we can handle additional runoff from the rain and water and manage, hopefully avoid the flooding that has occurred on occasion in the other retention basin. We're also looking at bathrooms in the field. So the location originally during the referendum that was looked at is here. There was a lot of back and forth with the school, with the neighbors, and the location currently being looked at is here. So more central so that the facility can better support the different activities in different fields that will have things going on. Access to water, access to bathrooms, fairly simple layout. This is not a very big structure, but it's intended to provide a couple of unisex or gender neutral facilities, as well as an area that might be able to be used as a concession, and some storage space. There will be a place for an ice maker, as well as access to water outside the building for use on the fields. And with that, I'll turn it back to you guys.
Can I ask a quick question? So you didn't talk about parking at all along Franklin. Is that something that's going to be put off for a while then?
So the parking is wrapped up with the site improvement approvals. We are seeking approval for the additional parking on Franklin. I know there has been some discussion about exactly what the best configuration or the best placement for that might be, so those discussions are ongoing. That work cannot be advanced until the approvals are in place. Our hope is that if it does advance, it would be advanced with the high school project when that's bid.
For this, you were able to get 3 bathrooms? You were able to get them down?
So
Which is great.
Yeah, so we obviously need to get the buy-in from the code official about this. This is the approach that we're taking to them, however. We do feel it works. We do feel we can make the case for this being adequate for the use.
Great.
And there may be large events where the district might have to augment, bring in some temporary bathrooms, but rather than paying to do a facility that would be oversized for the majority of activities, sell that as a solution that the district is using to save money in the construction of this, but also facilitate the broadest range of needs.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for going through this. I appreciate thinking and telling us about the need to pack things up for teachers prior to construction beginning. I think that's really important, but I'm also really concerned about student engagement right until the very last day of school. So I would just say, and maybe this is for the board, the administration, the planning group, how can we think about doing this in a way, providing potentially, I'm not sure where we get the time for teachers, but time to do this when students are not in the building. So just giving some thought to doing that in an organized way so that we certainly protect all of our teachers' things, but making sure we remember that when students are there, that should be the focus.
Scott, at the middle school, the student capacity increase is about 75 to 90, is that correct, with those 3 new flexible spaces?
In that range. That school right now, based on capacity to enrollment, is about 200 students over capacity. So, we feel you can probably accommodate. It all depends on how it's programmed, but if you wanted to, you could probably accommodate about half of that in the space that's being created here.
And then at the high school, it's, I think you quoted it, an increase in capacity of 125 to 200, is that the?
Well, I said it probably would accommodate about half the overcapacity situation there as well. And again, there's variance depending on how the space is programmed. So depending on how the classrooms are used in concert with the common space and in concert with the second floor space being added, it provides additional capacity, but it also provides the ability to better deliver the programming that is compromised in some ways right now. So there will be times when it probably will be programmed for, I would say, a more diverse range of activities, and other times that it might be providing an increased amount of capacity, all depending on how it's assigned.
Thank you.
Scott, can I ask about retention basins? I
Very exciting
find-
stuff.
Yeah, in facilities committee, you explained to us how you're going to maximize the capacity of the basin near the tennis courts and divert some of the flow from the rain garden that currently has some flooding issues.
Right.
And that there was a lot of flow going into that smaller area. And I thought that was very interesting, and I think that the public might be interested to hear about that.
Sure. So right now, the retention basin, so if you look at where the music rooms are, where the PAC is, there's a small area basically between that and the older portion of the building, which is the retention basin. So most of the water from the site runs to that basin to be managed, to be held, to be released over time into the storm sewer system. In fact, what we found when the engineers looked at it is that actually that storm system is not just picking up the site, it's also picking up some surrounding areas like roadways and things like that. So it's handling a lot of water. What we're proposing to do, we looked at a half dozen or so different types of solutions. The one we settled on is the most budget responsive, least cost, and we feel will do the job well, which is that you also have a second retention basin. If I'm facing the school, the PAC's to my left, the tennis courts to the right, you have a small, shallow basin next to the tennis courts. We're actually going to deepen that basin and change how the piping drains the site. So the site, instead of going directly to the basin next to the music area, which is flooded, we're going to divert through this new basin that we're going to make deeper and basically maximize the capacity of. The basin by the music area will then become effectively an overflow basin. So when that one fills up, only then will it channel to the one that has been overflowing. So in looking at that and working with the systems, how that connects into the street, we feel it will be able to better manage the situation on site because we're changing the way the water flows on site.
Thank you. For the educators in our audience, I find that, some of our students might be very interested in how that is being remediated. So thank you.
Scott, I want to talk about food.
Food, yes.
I know that there are some exciting ideas for the distributed dining location on the main floor where the old school store is at the high school.
Yes.
Is that going to be something that, I couldn't see where the construction begins on that. Is that this school year or over the summer?
So I didn't share that. We actually recently just met with the new food service person at the high school. We got a rundown on the desired menu. We walked the space, looked at some layout changes that we're going to sketch up and show you. So I don't have that yet because that meeting just occurred.
We just have a brand new director of food service. So I know
Yes.
there's some new ideas that have been brought forth.
And I've been sworn to secrecy. I'm not
Okay.
giving away the menu.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not giving away
I
the
won't
menu.
either then.
But yeah, so we are working on that right now. The goal is to be in a position to bid that with the high school project.
Terrific. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Any further questions? Scott, thank you very much
Okay,
for an
absolutely.
informative presentation. Thank you. I just want to correct I neglected before to introduce our board attorney, Frank Cavallo, who's joining us tonight. Unlike many boards that have their counsel sit in every meeting, we don't do that. We bring him in once in a while. We get a little extra brush up on our training, which we did today in closed session, and we appreciate that he joins us for the meeting and can give me any tips on my parliamentary procedure later on. So thank you for joining us and staying with us for the meeting.
Great. I wanted to ask Matt if he would take just a minute and kind of update us on the financials related to the
you.
referendum.
Great.
Thank you. So I've been tasked with updating the status of the referendum on a financial basis. I'll be rolling this out each month. Things are constantly changing. I did want to thank our team of professionals, Scott and Spiesel and his consulting engineers, and Kathy at Epic. They show up to our many meetings on time and ready to help us with solutions to the many challenges discussed before with rolling out these many projects in our referendum. I don't know if we could zoom in a little bit here. I love spreadsheets, by the way, as you guys will find out. I'm a CPA by training, and I enjoy the numbers. So in the top are each project, Riverside HVAC, which, as you can see by the red on the right, was a cost challenge. So we're going to be reviewing these consistently. We have the estimated original project costs, and then we contingencies. So in the original planning phase, we don't know how the bids are going to work out. This particular project was awarded on June 4th on the second bid, very late, if anyone's familiar with school construction, June 4th. So we were very, I think overall fortunate to get this done when we did on time, a day late, at a little higher cost. And as you can see by the next project, the high school HVAC is coming in a little under cost. It's in the black, so to speak. The electrical upgrades that is the project that we're waiting on, which was planned for the transformers to come in, and they'll be hooked up in the spring. So that is coming close to where they can work to for now. That came in lower because we didn't have to upgrade Riverside's electrical capacity for the new Airedale units. And we're, dollar-wise, we're not even close to that 20% range. And the construction projects are running slightly over cost at around a little over $68,000 right now. There's plenty of time left with, as Scott talked about, the bid schedule. We're going to be going out there nice and early and hopefully attracting many bidders. As we all know, construction is very cyclical. So, it depends on a lot of factors, how many people bid and the prices. We like to get a lot of bidders out there, hopefully the best ones. And at the bottom is still a work in process. It's our soft costs. So I'm digging in deep to make sure that we're pulling in costs even from the prior years that related to some of the pre-planning parts of the referendum, so we get those costs calculated. I do think I've done a lot of work in the last few days that we are under budget on the soft cost side, and look forward to that update next month, October 29th. I think that everything is going smoothly. We hope to make up, like I said, the $68,000 is over the next few projects. So we'll see as the bids come in where they fall. There's been a couple positive things. So I built in the change orders in here too. We have some pending change orders. PSE&G has asked us to design a road. Scott and his consulting engineers right now have a plan. We're going to submit it to PSE&G. It's a semi-impervious road, which is much cheaper than moving the box, that would be about $107,000. So we're hoping that PSE&G will accept that design. And, a couple other smaller change orders pending, some of them to the good. So we've had a couple design changes on the security vestibules came up. Our Dave Harding came up with a nice suggestion, and Scott is working through that, and that's why we're going out to bid a week later on that. And so, we're working hard to get these projects done the best possible way, on time, and under budget. So I'll be updating this each month.
Thank you.
I have a,
Can I just say,
go ahead.
just one clarifying point, Matt, when you said over cost, I look at it and think of it as above or below the original estimate, because I think that the awards we've been tracking pretty closely with. I think we're under some of the awards and over in one case.
Yes.
What were the total costs associated with opening Riverside a day late? And is that in there?
So no, that's not in there. We're in negotiations coming up in the next couple weeks in the closeout meeting. We're going to get back as much as we possibly can. I think the information has been disseminated. What I originally had sent across to everyone was on the high side. But we want to get the most possible dollars back from the contractor.
Okay, and what was the total that we're trying to get back?
We're negotiating on that.
We're negotiating what the bills
With the
were?
contractor, yes. Everyone was sent that information. So we want to get back as much as possible. It doesn't behoove us to, talk about it here in the open public session, but
But once it's settled, we'll be happy to share it with everyone.
absolutely, which hopefully will be by the October 29th meeting.
Okay, and if what we don't get back will then go into that as a cost?
Yeah, we would capitalize that cost in as a part of the referendum project, yes.
Okay, so that would be going the wrong way, okay. All right, so you'll let us know by the October meeting, okay.
I will give you a status update, absolutely.
Status, yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
No, I
Thank you.
I thank you
Thank
for the transparent disclosure. I appreciate the spreadsheets. So some of
You're
us
welcome.
also like spreadsheets. and It's
All
nice
right.
to see it all in one spot. And I hope that next month we can see it maybe a little bit in advance of the meetings, if it's possible. I mean, I know you
Absolutely.
guys just came up with the form, so I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Helpful, so that we can all kind of have time to spend time with the numbers. Thank you.
Can I ask a question too? Can you all see that?
No.
Okay.
Is-
Unfortunately.
Yeah, so, right, no, understood, but next time maybe we could do it in a different way so that you guys can see it.
Yeah. and-
Oh, we can see it.
Thank you.
And
Wait, no, I
will-
can't.
That is a valid point.
Will
Will it
we-
be posted online?
Yeah,
though?
will we post it somewhere?
Can we
Yes.
post this? Okay,
Thank you for
Absolutely.
asking.
in the referendum
In the referendum.
page? Is that, okay.
Yep.
Page? On the page for the, okay.
Yeah, one key point is it's a snapshot. So
Right, the date in the left corner.
Yeah,
right.
Just
So
so people have it.
the change order numbers, until the projects are closed out, the change order numbers can still be adjusted.
yes,
But other than that, it's, I think, not going to change.
Right.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Matt.
Moving on, Bob.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the next item of business is we are talking about consideration of a planning consultant. And I think I would like to welcome Bob Powell up to the podium if you're ready to give us a presentation. Bob, again, is chair of our ad hoc committee on Strategic Advisory Committee on Growth and Capacity. And he has expertise in the area of school impact. And I think he wants to talk about some of the estimates he's provided to the committee and explain them to the board.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay. We can send it to people. I don't see it. I haven't seen it. We get people afterwards.
Everybody. I'm going to see if I can talk and chew gum at the same time with this thing. I'm pleased to be back with you tonight on behalf of the volunteer committee that I'm pleased to serve on. The Committee on Growth and Development, as I think we discussed at the last meeting, is made up of volunteers in Princeton who, among us, have a variety of professional backgrounds in matters relating to growth, planning, zoning, construction. And I'm honored to serve with them on this volunteer effort that we're helping you with on the enrollment issue. The board had asked us to take a look at some of the growth factors that are going to start driving, if they're not already started to drive, increased public school enrollment in Princeton. So what I have done for tonight's presentation is put together a summary of a report on one of the key factors that is driving growth in the Princeton area, which is Princeton's laudatory and worthy effort to increase the amount of affordable housing in our community. The affordable housing policies in Princeton mirror a trend that's going on throughout the state of New Jersey. And so what I would like to do tonight is highlight for you what they are in real time now, and how they are likely, how these policies, these zoning policies, are likely in the near term and in the not so near term affect growth, development, the number of new housing units that are going to be created in our town, and therefore our best estimate using the data that's available of how those new housing units are going to affect public school enrollment. Let me first start very briefly with the background on the affordable housing issue in New Jersey. Many of you are familiar with this, but as I've talked to people in the community, many are not. And again, I apologize for the small type. I thought I'd made that as big as I could. But it's actually pretty straightforward. The obligations that Princeton is dealing with for affordable housing are not discretionary. They're not the result of regulations. They're not even the result of legislation. They're the result of a series of Supreme Court decisions that go back to the late 70s that have found that the New Jersey Constitution, in the language of the Supreme Court in 1983, requires that all municipalities, in the exercise of their delegated powers to zone, must, quote, afford a realistic opportunity for the construction of their fair share of the present and prospective regional need for low and moderate income housing. That is a constitutional mandate. It started with court decisions back in the 70s and 80s, and it continues to this day. The legislature weighed in a few years later with something called the Fair Housing Act, which set up a series of strategies that towns must follow for complying with what's called the Mount Laurel decision. And you've probably been reading, if you pay any attention to the courts, the papers, that there are probably 250 to 300 towns in New Jersey right now that are still struggling with how to come to terms with their current obligations under the Mount Laurel obligation. Princeton, let me back up a minute. The slide on the right just summarizes Princeton's obligations for what's called the third round for the Mount Laurel program through the year 2025. Princeton's obligations were determined in a 6-month trial that I was actually involved in, representing in part Princeton's interest in the matter as an expert before Judge Jacobson. And her opinion really established the methodology that all towns are now following in New Jersey for how they figure out what their obligations are between now and 2025. Princeton's obligations, as you see there, require it to satisfy its gap period and its prospective need period with the creation of 757 low and moderate income units through changes in its zoning that can realistically be expected to create that many units in this time frame. Princeton has spent a great deal of time developing a plan. Many of us have seen the details of it. It's still in the course of being modified around the edges, but the essential elements of the plan, as I will describe to you in a moment, are pretty well established. There are two basic strategies for the plan, as you see on the right-hand slide. There are going to be a series of zoning changes in the zoning ordinance that are going to allow what are called 100% affordable housing projects to be built. That is projects that don't have any developer subsidy, that are highly subsidized by federal and state tax credits, and where the households that occupy those units are all low and moderate income persons, no market rate units. Then there's a second group of zoning changes, as you see, that Princeton is going to adopt that are inclusionary zoning plans, which means those plans will give developers substantial density bonuses on certain tracts of land where perhaps now you can only build 3 units to the acre. You may now be able to build 15 units to the acre on the same size parcel and presumably make a lot more money in the process, but on the condition that you set aside of all the units you build, 20% of them, deed restrict them, and subsidize them so that the households who occupy them don't have to pay more than 30% of their household income every year for rent. So they're subsidized housing, but not by the public. They're subsidized by the developers, but the developers are getting their own benefit through the increased zoning densities. I'm going to show you a summary of the plan in just a moment, but the purpose of my presentation is not so much to educate you about affordable housing, but to help us all understand how the Affordable Housing Initiative is affecting public school enrollment. How do we know what that connection is? That's what the next set of slides is addressing. Demographers and economists and housing experts now have access for the first time, unless in the last 10 years, for the first time in a long time, to some extremely valuable data from the U.S. Census that's done on a year-by-year basis based on household surveys that the American Community Survey Program conducts of households in all parts of the country. And those surveys, when properly digested and sorted, give us data on the behavior of households in the last 5 to 7 years who have recently moved into houses in regions like ours. By that I mean income, education, employment, and growth, the kind of house they live in, and how many school-age kids, public school-age kids, that they have. It's even more helpful now than ever because we now can separate out from all school-age kids, public school-age kids. Because in certain places like Princeton, a great number of school-age kids go to private school or they are homeschooled. We can now screen that group out and just focus on the public school-age students. What you'll see so what you create from this data is a series of what are called multipliers. Once you know the geographic area that you're looking at, and then the type of housing that's being created, 3-bedroom, single family, 1-bedroom apartments, and everything in between, the data will give us a multiplier of the number of public school-age kids coming out of each of those housing types, sorted by 3 different grade levels, K through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12. 12 years ago, we couldn't do that. It was all statewide and mixing apples and oranges and grapefruits, but now the data is quite precise and much more credible. So we pulled together, for the purposes of this presentation, the public school student multipliers for those housing units that are likely to be created by the Princeton Affordable Housing Plan over the next period of years. And here is a summary of the results. And again, with apologies, I thought this was going to be bigger. But let me just summarize it for you here. There are, in the Princeton Affordable Housing Plan that's on its way to being adopted this fall, 11 proposed zoning changes in the master plan. The 11 are enumerated on the left-hand column here by location. They're actually specific pieces of property in town that will tell you, for example, the first property that's listed here is the 900 Herrontown Road / SAVE site. You must know where it's located now. And the site is a small site on which is going to be built an apartment building. It's zoned for apartment building with 64 units. All 64 will be affordable. This column tells you how many units in the zoning plan are going to be market rate. This tells you how many in the plan are going to be affordable. This is one of those 100% affordable projects that's in the plan. It's going to be funded largely with what's called a low-income housing tax credit from the federal government. That application is actually going in this fall, and I think it has a high likelihood for being approved. That project will likely be built in the next 2 to 3 years. What will it mean? Just using that one as an example. If you come across the page, and I'm going to get to how we got to this number, but the total public school age children coming out of that first project will be approximately 36. 36 students coming out of 64 units. And from the data we have, we know that those 36 students are going to be distributed largely in the K through 5 age group, with a few more 6 through 8, and not too many in high school. You can go down this list to the other projects. One of the largest ones is on Thanet Drive, which is an inclusionary project. This is the largest inclusionary project in the near term. This first group is those that we have determined are likely to be built ASAP for a variety of reasons that we can talk about. This one on Thanet Drive is a project, a site that's under contract to a major housing developer, Avalon Bay Communities. Many of you may know of them because they built the old hospital site into an apartment complex. We don't know the exact density that's going to be provided for the Thanet Road property. I've been very conservative in assuming that it's, and we'll talk about this over here, it's about 18 units to the acre. The project on Witherspoon Street that Avalon has built had a density of 28 units to the acre, which was quite a bit larger. But let's assume that the density here is not quite as great. It would create, as you see here, if you can read the numbers, 270 total units. They're all apartments, of which 75 will be low and moderate income. And out of both of those groups of apartments, the market rate and the affordables, there will be 109 public school age students going to the school system here. Again, the majority of those are going to the elementary level, 63, 27 are going to the middle school, and 19 to the high school. The next project is Franklin Maple. I'll run through this quickly. Franklin Maple is another 100% affordable housing project. It's been announced as having 80 total units with only 60 affordable. There's still a debate about why you wouldn't make it all 80 affordable, but assuming that this is the way it's getting built, you'd have 40 public school age students coming out of there with the distribution as you see here. And then the final project in the near term is an assisted living project, which will not have any public school age children. So in the near term, this group A, our projection is that there will be 503 new housing units generated by the zoning enhancements in the near term. and 186 public school age students generated. The second group of projects, which are also in the current plan that are in Group B here, we've determined are probably not going to be fully built out by 2025, but they will be built out because the economic incentives are potent. And the land is there, the water, the sewer, the zoning is there, and there's certainly going to be demand. The main reason that they're in a more of a delayed category is having to do with site control. Many of these are not quite under site control yet by a developer, and that usually takes a year or two to make happen. If all of these are built, as they're laid out here with the multipliers that I'm going to show you in a minute, there would be another 635 units of housing built. 148 of them would be affordable. And you'd have another 225 public school age students generated by that Group B. The total impact of the zoning changes that we're showing here would be around 1,100 or 1,200 units of new housing built in Princeton during that time frame, and approximately 411 new public school age children generated. The reason that this one issue about growth is kind of important is the magnitude of the growth that it suggests. We're projecting 1,138 new units of housing. Let me give you the context for that. Right now in Princeton, there are about 11,000 units of housing. So this would be roughly a 10% increase just in the aggregate number of units, apartments or single-family homes. An apartment's a unit, a big house is a unit. They're all the same. They're units in this count. So this would represent a significant increase in the housing stock in Princeton. And as our committee has discussed, and as our experience has taught us, these units will generate attractive places to live for families who have young children. Now let me just jump over before we leave the summary here to the other slide on the other side. I haven't taken any really amount of time to go through with you the multipliers, and I'm not sure with the small type here that that's going to be helpful to the audience. There are some handouts up here, and I'll let my colleagues at the front decide to the extent to which you want to hand them out. But what the multipliers will tell you as you get up close to these things is two basic realities. Let's take a market rate apartment that Avalon Bay may build on Thanet Drive that's only one bedroom. That market rate apartment is going to have a 0.23 multiplier. That means that for every 10 of those one-bedroom apartments, there's going to be 2.3 students coming out of that apartment. But if they build a 3-bedroom apartment in that same complex, the multiplier is 6.7. So for every 10 3-bedroom apartments, there are going to be 6 students coming out. So the bigger the apartment, the larger is the ratio of students coming out. The other thing that is true across all communities about multipliers has to do with income. Low and moderate income housing units almost always produce greater multipliers of public school age students than market rate housing, keeping bedroom counts and size fixed. So an affordable 2-bedroom apartment, which is shown over here, that would be built, is going to generate a multiplier of 5.19, but that same 2-bedroom market rate apartment would only generate a multiplier of 4.2. It's an interesting fun fact, which doesn't have anything to do with the results, because this is the way the affordable housing program is going to roll out, and not just in Princeton. The other thing that it tends to show over all these projects, as I said earlier, is that the more than 50% of the new public school age students tend to be heading toward the elementary school level and a much smaller percent to the high school level. So how that affects capacity is beyond our pay grade. We're going to let others deal with that. But what we hope to do is help you understand what's going on with the zoning, because what we're talking about here is not a one-shot zoning phenomenon. There will be the 4th round of Mount Laurel starting in 2028. And what happens in 2026, I'm sorry. In 2026, every town in New Jersey is going to have to go through the same gyrations that it's just been through in the 3rd round. What is our new obligation? And in order to figure that out, that's what the trial before Judge Jacobson was all about. Every town has got to go through a searching economic and demographic presentation of its own peculiar employment, demographics, static growth, and opportunities. And that means that towns like Princeton, Westfield, Cranford, West Windsor, South Brunswick, all of which exhibit very similar qualities of growth and dynamism and development, are inevitably going to find the methodology assigning them another sizable obligation for the period 2026 to 2036. We're working with a whole bunch of towns now, advising them on their plans where they may have a total requirement of 14 units. And they have a lot of land. The problem is they're not growing, and nobody wants to live there. So they don't have the problem, or the challenge, I shouldn't call it a problem, they don't have the challenge of affordable housing that higher growth communities are having. But let me make one more observation before we take some questions. And that is that enrollment growth in Princeton is going to be, has been, and will continue to be driven by much more than affordable housing. It's going to be driven by much more than just the affordable housing plan. And I think it's important not to lose sight of that. Princeton, after its consolidation, now has 18 square miles of land. A great deal of it is vacant. Almost all of that land is served by water, sewer, decent roads, and other forms of transportation. Princeton is sitting in the middle of one of the most vibrant and diverse employment centers in New Jersey. Our office market, called the Princeton office market, has 20-some million square feet of Class A office space. It's the 2nd largest office market in New Jersey outside of Hudson County. We have 2 of the nation's newest healthcare centers, some of the leading colleges and universities in the world. Our community, in other words, is an increasingly attractive place for people to move to and live and work. And that's good news. I know there's nothing wrong with that. That's exactly why we're probably all here. We enjoy living here as well. What it's going to mean is that investment in real estate in this community is going to continue to grow. This is where builders want to be. This is where home developers want to be. And so the question is going to be not whether Princeton continues to thrive as a real estate market, but the more narrow question for the Board of Education, which it's asked our committee and Ralph's committee to help them look at, is how we face the challenge of accommodating this growth in student enrollment in the context of state budget caps and other restrictions on your revenues and expenses that are completely out of sync with what's going on in the real estate world. To help understand that issue, just one more case study, if I haven't completely put you to sleep yet. I want to show you a relatively small project that we also modeled recently here in Princeton that's not an inclusionary project. This project has nothing to do really with the affordable housing plan, but you've probably been reading about it. It's called the Landwin Project. That's in front of the planning board right now for approval for the development of 30 large single-family homes in a cluster development. It's probably hard to read the numbers here, but let me just summarize them for you. These are going to be 4-bedroom market-rate homes, single-family homes, about 4,000 square feet each. The multiplier for the public school-age children is 8.44, which means that out of the 30 homes that are going to be built, our forecast is there'll be 25 public school-age children generated by the project. And I didn't put that number up there to draw any judgment or conclusions about the project. There's nothing wrong with the project, but merely to illustrate that this kind of project is consistent with the current zoning in Princeton. Has nothing to do with the affordable housing zoning. And with the increased demand and the ongoing attractiveness of the town, in my professional opinion, I think we can assume that over the next several years, there are going to be a continuation of investments like this in spots throughout the town that are already zoned for this type of housing. And when the houses are built, the families will come, and when the families come, we are likely to experience this kind of public school age student impact. Therefore, I and my committee have urgently suggested to the board that we get planning. We try to get our hands around this because it's already happening. Our committee's not involved in the enrollment side of this, which a lot of smart people are looking at already. But what we find most urgent about these growth and development trends is that the enrollment implications are significant and they're going to be long-term. So with that, let me step back and see if the board has any questions.
Thank you so much, Bob. We are very grateful to you as a board, as a school district, for dedicating your time and donating your time and your highly professional skills to us.
I should have said this is not done on my day job. So.
No, we appreciate that. And I just will note, you were a grandfather of 3 children at Riverside
Yes.
School?
No, two at Riverside. Audrey's not quite out of
Okay, 2
university
at
league
Riverside,
yet.
and I just want to say
She's on her way, though.
We were able to intrigue you with this question because of I think, some of your connections and your history in the community, and we're grateful. So thank you for this information. I think we would first like to open it up to see if the board has any questions.
Thank you very, very much. I do have a question. If you could just explain to the board and the community, given the multipliers, when you're showing us numbers of students, public school age students, it's more than half elementary. Given the multipliers, do you expect turnover in that housing so that it's always more elementary? Or are these elementary kids going to move up through our system? And sort of how do we think about that as we plan for the future?
Well, that's a really intelligent question. Thanks. One of the things that we had to go through in setting up a method, in trying to figure out the methodology for how to set a goal for a town, this very issue comes up. And there's a factor in the methodology formula called filtering, which means what happens to the effect of older housing that was built, let's say, in the 60s and 70s and even the 80s. That's kind of old housing nowadays. When the original people get older, the kids go away and they move out. And there's no simple answer to that, but it appears from a large amount of data that's been collected that in high growth towns like Princeton, the older households are replaced by somewhat younger households. So you probably cannot expect in all likelihood to see that that bubble of elementary school kids work their way through the school system, and then the parents send them off to college, and then there are no more kids coming out of that house for the next 25 years. The house likely changes hands. Now, it's a little more complicated than that because a lot of empty nesters don't move. And so in that situation, those kids are gone from that household. But at the same time, what we're seeing here is that the real estate market in Princeton is way more dynamic than any other, maybe other than 50 or 60 towns in New Jersey. The demand to build new housing is inexorable in this town. What's holding it back is zoning, primarily. So you're going to have some of that filtering going on, but what I think gives us the most pause is to look at the prospect of a fair amount of new construction. 1,100 new homes just from the affordable housing plan are going to be created.
Michelle?
Bob, this is actually a special moment because think I get to answer a question that you asked, and that was about the Franklin Maple numbers. And you were wondering why, if there's a total of 80 units, only 60 are affordable. And that's because 20 are already on that site and they're owned by the Princeton Housing Authority. And so,
That's a
because
good
they're
point.
just a replacement,
They're going to be
they don't get
relocated
counted.
temporarily and brought back in.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Right. That's right. That's an interesting site. The Princeton Borough Housing Authority owns, I think, 11 or 12 federally subsidized units that were built, some of them in the 40s and 50s. And they look it. I've been in some of those units. They would be replaced with new housing. And you're right. The people who are currently living there would have first rights to come back in. So it was a little deceptive when I saw these numbers because it suggested that those folks would come back in and pay market rate rent, but they won't. All 80 of those units will be affordable, but Princeton won't get credit for more than 60. Good point.
So there's
Thank you.
actually more, your multiplier would go up.
No, these are seniors.
Oh, they're seniors.
These are seniors.
Debbie?
So on your proposal here, what confuses me is you said Princeton agreed to implement a plan for the third round period through 2025 that will satisfy 757. But then if I go to the detail, maybe I'm just not finding this, you only show by 2025, 208.
I was afraid somebody was going to ask me that good question. The short answer, to answer your question, there's a clear answer to that question that will make your hair hurt. And the reason it's complicated is that under the COA rules and the Fair Housing Act rules, towns can get credits, bonus credits, for doing certain things that are way more than 1 unit per 1 unit. For example, a simple one is that all rental units that are built under this plan give the town 2-for-1 credits. So up to 25% of its obligation. So when you build a new rental unit that's affordable, if you build 10 new rental units, you get 20 credits for those 10 units. You get special credits for group homes. You get special credits for homes for the disabled. So I'd be happy to circulate the latest cheat sheet that I've seen on how this plan gets them to compliance, but it does.
So do we have to do 757?
No.
So what is it we have to do?
That plan.
So 356?
Let me put it this way. If Princeton didn't change a thing, let me just go to the sheet here. If Princeton didn't change a thing in the summary that I put up there. Yes, they would be certified.
So all we have to, I just want to make sure I got this, 356 is all the town has to do for affordable housing
Right.
before 2025. But you also said only 208 will be done by 2025. And then you said the rest of them, the 148, will be done after,
Well,
but that's...
what I said, yeah, but I'm going to remind you what the court said.
Right,
The test is not whether the units get built, it's whether the zoning that enables them creates a realistic opportunity.
I don't know what that means.
It's a financial no, it's actually very simple. It's a financial calculation. Let me give you two contrasting examples. Years ago, towns who had large numbers would go out and zone for affordable housing pieces of farmland that had no water, no sewer, had wetlands, steep slopes, and the nearest road was 1.5 miles away. And they were going to let somebody build 20 units to the acre. Well, that's never going to happen. That was unrealistic. That was not a realistic opportunity. So part of what actually we do with towns is help them defend their plans, because there are people who look at these plans, stakeholders who are challenging plans like this. Largely, there are two groups. There are the builders who want more, and there's fair share housing that wants more. So fair share housing routinely, and it's the adversary right now for Princeton. Fair share housing is telling Princeton, you can do better. Reach a little higher. Go a little further. There are no builders right now that are suing Princeton, but there are a whole bunch of towns that we're working with where the builders have their own plans to satisfy these obligations, and the towns are fighting and they don't want the builders' plans. So you often get into dueling expert opinions about whose plan is financially feasible. And some towns lose those arguments because they put plans forward that aren't realistic financially. So that's what it means. The court can't dictate, once it determines that a plan is financially feasible, the courts understand that there's cycles and there's economic issues, but sooner or later the units will get built. That's all they have to conclude.
Okay.
And that's what I've done here.
I just want to be clear. So 208 by 2025,
That's an estimate.
high, low, are we 10% off?
Well, doesn't it also mean 208 if they do it in that configuration? Because if the configuration changes, then the request for units will change, because you get credit if you're doing a 3-bedroom or if you're doing rentals. So if they change the
Well, these are all rentals.
configuration.
These are all going to be rentals.
Okay.
I think the only comment I would make, Debbie, about the Group A, because we've had this discussion internally with the town, is that I have been very, very conservative about the Avalon Bay project in my assumption that it's going to be zoned at 18 units to the acre. I think there's a possibility that it may be more.
And
So-
then,
so,
then
I
for
mean-
B, would B not start till 2028?
Here's the reason B is in a later build-out category, and that is that all the major projects in this category, the Herringtown Road, Princeton Shopping Center, and the other inclusionary zones, are parcels of land that right now are not under any degree of control by a developer. They're going to have to be assembled. Like the Princeton Shopping Center, for example, those 150 units are planned to be built on the south end of the shopping center behind what is now the emergency rescue building in some woods. That's going to require a complete reconfiguration of the parking lot of the shopping center, but it can be done. But it's complicated. There are going to be planning board hearings and neighbors and this and that. But the idea would be to carve out acres back there. The shopping center owner, presumably, the plan assumes that the shopping center owner, who's not a residential developer, would make a deal with a housing developer, would go through planning board approval to build these 150 units. That's going to take, in my opinion, more than 7 years.
So are we talking 2030?
Yeah. It could be 2030. It could be. I don't know the answer to that. My crystal ball is.
Well, no, because the issue is obviously the students. So,
Right.
we're talking students we're not going to see for almost, 12 years. Okay.
Right.
All right, I just want to make sure I understand that part. Okay.
Bob, if I can just piggyback off of that, though, by focusing just on the 208 affordable units, what you, I think, are trying to suggest to us is that's not where all the growth is coming from, because you've got the market rate units as well.
Right.
So it's not 208 affordable units that you're projecting, but 503 total units, which have different multipliers, but they all will drive the number of students as well. So I thought what you were suggesting is we don't just focus on the affordable units, but on the totality of the growth that will come from this.
Well, I think I've shown the growth that will come from this, the affordable housing plan. The last point I made was that there's a whole several square miles of the rest of the town is ripe for its own development, not inclusionary, just old-fashioned big house development like the Landwin project, that for which there is a very strong market. And the zoning is in place. And so you're going to get a series of projects like that inevitably every year or two that's starting to add 30 here, 40 there, 26 students here. And pretty soon, 7 or 8 years from now, unless there's a change in zoning in all of that vacant land in Princeton, you can start adding another 100 or 200 units to this public school student list in the next 5 to 7 years. Look, there's a point at which the Board of Ed's challenge is complicated by the fact that you are playing defense and catch-up in economic cycles. You don't control the drivers and generators of your customers. Somebody else is making the rules for who builds homes and when they're built and how big they are. And I guess there's not much you can do about that. What we're trying to help you understand is to handicap the near-term future as best we can, based on what we know now about the zoning that's in place and is coming forward. And I think the message that our committee wanted to deliver to you is that some significant increases in enrollment are on the way.
Thank you. Brian?
Bob, just to make sure I understand. So you've been talking about the affordable housing plan, and you've noted that that's not the only potential driver of growth. We know that especially in Littlebrook and Riverside, where a lot of the housing stock was built in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there's been an awful lot of tear downs, expansions, remodeling in ways that make the new homes very attractive to families. And so, and this may be more of a question for Ralph and his committee, but there are other things going on, including people moving out and people aging in place. So
I live on Van Devender, and I regularly walk and run to the high school and back in the morning. I go up Madison. Madison, which is a lovely little street, 1 block. There are 8 homes under complete reconstruction on Madison right now, out of maybe 19. Exactly what you're talking about. Gut rehabs. I just found out from a realtor that the Texel Research Institute property is about to be put under contract on the lake and subdivided for, I don't know, 1.5, 2 acre lots. That's a lot of homes. I think it's 20-some acres. I can't remember how many, but it's
22.
Yeah. That could be, that's a Landwin project. That's a good example. I mean, and it's as of right, not inclusionary. It's a matter of time when sites like that get absorbed because there's a market.
And then a second question is, you described some of the forces that we don't control that make this an attractive place for developers to build and for families to move. The mayor, the 6 council members, and the 3 people running for council have all said that they have a shared goal of creating more affordable market rate housing to address what they perceive as the missing middle.
The workforce housing.
So I presume that one way to do that would be to make some changes to zoning, for example, in the central business district, look at the parking ratios, or to look at other properties and increase density. So if any, does your work, it doesn't contemplate any of that, does it?
Yes, it does. Let me
It
just
does.
show you. If you go to the, oh, shoot, show my pointer here. On the summary of all the zoning plans on the left, the one at the very bottom is cryptically labeled other inclusionary zones. That is a kind of a placeholder for what Brian was talking about. And there's been a fair amount of discussion about it internally, which is workforce housing, smaller units that appeal to, that are affordable, but not in the deeply discounted definition of affordability, but for people who are school teachers or policemen or make $75,000 a year. And that would require an increase in density, a relaxing of parking requirements. We don't yet know exactly what the zoning ordinance for that element is still a little undefined. I've been very conservative in estimating how many units would get created, but it's generally focused in what was the old borough, where the greatest demand for workforce housing would clearly occur.
And then I guess one last question, I swear. So you're an expert in this field and you do this across the state. You mentioned the word conservative. So taking out the component of time, whether things happen in 7 years or 11 years, do you think, how would you make a guess on the variance of the numbers that you've put down here, which are pretty granular? Do you think they'd be more likely to be higher than what you have shown, or lower, if that's a fair question?
I think that there are 3 or 4 significant projects here where my estimate of market rate and affordable homes is very low. I've tried to be sensitive to what the town is trying to achieve with settling its affordable housing matter. And I think I ought to leave it at that. I think these are conservative numbers. I think these are conservative numbers.
I have a few questions
Oh,
also, if I
okay.
could. So it seems like so much of this depends upon the public school-age children multiplier, and I'm having trouble seeing how that's derived. Is that based on Princeton? Is it a national? Can you explain how it's derived?
I can. In between the biennial census that's done, in the last 2 decades, the census and some of its collaborators in the academic community have set up something called the American Community Survey Program, which annually sends census takers into communities all over America and does interviews of households. That data is now published, and those questionnaires that they take down and answers to are quite comprehensive questions. When did you move into this house? How many kids do you have? What are the ages of everybody in the household? That sort of thing. That data is all on a big computer somewhere, and now private companies, including the firm that we collaborate with, eConsult Solutions, has set up a subsidiary that does nothing but mine that data for this kind of information, because it has incredible value for companies, banks, municipalities, and government. So what it allows you to do is pick, if you want data for multipliers that's credible and statistically significant, you can't look at those surveys for just Mercer County or for Princeton and West Windsor. This data is based upon census questionnaires from approximately 700,000 households in census tracts that are specifically selected to mimic Princeton. Some of those census tracts are in Morris County. Some of them are in Hunterdon County. Some of them are in Middlesex County. But if you looked at the characteristics of those households and closed your eyes and didn't know their address, they would look a lot like the same census tracts in Princeton. So on the basis of that, you can then start sorting the way computers can do it, and that's what happens here. I've done this analysis for communities that are completely different than Princeton demographically, and I can tell you the multipliers are dramatically different. They're dramatically different.
Well, I guess we're talking here about the Thanet Road Avalon Bay facility that'll be built probably, and we have Avalon Bay that was just built. Do we have the multipliers for the Avalon Bay that was just built on Witherspoon that we can compare to the ones you calculated, and how are they close? And similarly, Merriwick, Stanworth, and Griggs Farm, are our numbers in these?
I don't have the last two, but we do have the ones. We have, I think Steve's people pulled together the numbers for the Witherspoon project. And the overall multiplier for the Witherspoon project was about 0.33 per unit, compared with about 0.4 that I'm using here. One of the differences is that the higher the density and the larger the units, the higher the income is, and the less child-friendly they are. But I looked at those numbers, and they're pretty close to what we're using.
Well, I guess a 0.3 versus, or a 3 point something versus a 4 point something or a 5 point something, it seems like that could have a big impact on the numbers, I guess, in my estimation. I guess I also have a question on the two groups you have up there, the by 2025 and the ones afterwards. When we had the demographers report in the last few years, it seemed like we were taught that anything 6 years and out is, you don't spend a lot of time basing decisions on, because it's a wild guess. So I'm a little concerned that we have all these numbers after 2025. When you describe the Princeton Shopping Center, it could happen, but that seems like it's a lot of dominoes having to fall the right way at the right time. I don't know about 375 Terhune or Harrington Road, but it just seems like we're talking about another 225 public school-age children that I wouldn't make a decision on based on those.
I understand the point you're making, and I would make this observation about the one example you used, the Princeton Shopping Center. We had a long discussion about where to put this one. If this plan gets approved, let me put it this way: if this plan gets approved, I'm going to speak as if I'm in the shoes of the owner of the Princeton Shopping Center, who's in business to do only one major thing, which is to make money. With this zoning in place, let's say as of January 1st of next year, it would take me 6 months to do a plan to reconfigure the site, and another year to get that through the planning board. And it'll be as of right. I won't need many variances. So in 18 months, I'm going to have a site ready to put out to bid in 2020 to a developer. And I can tell you, as a developer, I would love to bid on it, because it's a great location. It's a great location. I can make a very good argument that that site is going to go sooner than later. The other ones, the inclusionary zones, which are still being developed, also have the potential for not 1 or 2 or 3 transformational projects. Those zones are going to start generating 15-unit projects in the borough, 20-unit projects, 20% of which are affordable. And there are going to be many, many, many of them. Infill, infill, infill. The land in the downtown is so poorly used right now. If you look at an aerial of historically how it got developed and where it sits right now, given the demand for space. But your crystal ball may be as good as mine. I'm telling you what the market is wanting to see happen here, if the zone, then the zoning's been kind of holding it back. If the zoning has a yellow light or a green light for many of these sites, I think you're going to see some significant investment take place sooner than later. So,
Also, another question. So, a lot of predictions that we're going to go into a recession in 2020. What happens then? Will these move as quickly
we're
if
all in
that
a lot of
happens?
trouble at that point. So
What's it?
we're
Yeah,
all in a lot of trouble,
yeah. But if we
especially those of
can,
us in the real estate business.
yeah. I mean, will that affect these Project Group A, do you think, if,
Yeah, it could. It could slow down the pace of development. No question about it. The last recession certainly did.
yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
And I got another question on the Franklin Maple. So that's 80 units. So is that funded already? Michelle, it seems like you know more. I mean, is that,
I'm a commissioner on the housing
Yeah.
authority, and so we, right now, we own part of that.
Microphone.
oh, you, sorry, you,
I'm a commissioner on the Housing Authority, and so the Princeton Housing Authority owns that existing housing there, but there's a parking lot that is owned by the municipality, and so there are plans to put, replace the housing that the Housing Authority has and put 80 units there. So is that going to be, it's going to be it's going to be exclusively 100% low income, and I don't anticipate that there's going to be a problem finding funding for that.
so the 80 units, there is money for it.
I don't anticipate,
Okay.
but
Let me-
it's not far enough along in the plans.
I can help you on that, because one of the things we also do is we represent a lot of public housing authorities in financing projects like this. That project is going to need what's called a 9% low-income housing tax credit. There are only 3 or 4 of those given out a year through the State Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency. SAVE has already submitted an application for a 9% credit for this cycle, 2019, which is aggressive, and I applaud them for it. In talking to the folks, at least in the town, about the Franklin Maple site, the feeling is that that's probably a 2021 funding. But if you look at how that application would score at HMFA, it would be extraordinarily high, given the demographics. I mean, this is where the HMFA wants to put projects like this. So, but that's still I mean, you even the projects that score well, as you probably know, often go into tiebreakers with these. These 9% credits are really hard to get. They're very competitive. So sooner, I think the applications are going to start going in next year, and it's just going to be a kind of waiting it out to see when they can get a breakthrough and get it funded. I don't think that one's going to take much longer than maybe 3 or 4 years to get built.
On the 757 units that we have to meet, I guess I'm having troubles with the word unit. Is it better described as a credit or something like that, where you have to have a certain number of credits?
Right.
And it sounds like 2 credits for each rental, so that drops your number in half? If you did all rentals, it would
Right,
be...
no, there's a limit to how many of your,
Oh, that's
how
right,
many of your
25%.
units you can get a credit for. It's 25%. I mean, the other thing you get credits for, and this is really getting a little wonkish, Princeton has been doing affordable housing for longer than many towns in the United States. When you do an affordable housing deal, one of the technical things that happen is that there's a deed restriction that gets put on the unit that says, here are the income restrictions that apply to that unit for a term. It's usually, the old deed restrictions often were only 15 or 20 years. And they were not well written from the town's point of view. They were like in the 80s and the early 90s. So you can get a credit now under the current rules if you go back to an owner of an expiring deed restriction and get him to extend the deed restriction for another 30 years. You didn't build anything. But now that unit doesn't go back into the marketplace. It's still income restricted, and you get a credit for it. Those are the kind of things, they're paper credits, but nevertheless, they're credits.
Are we trying to do that? Do you know?
Oh, yes. This administration is relentless in its search for ways to get units.
I think,
Thank you very much. It's helpful. But you mentioned the way that you calculate the credits. If you could circulate that, I'd love to read that.
Oh, boy.
That was the 757, it's really
Oh, I see, the
The one you were
chart, yeah.
just
That's
that-
in- That's, if you want to look on the town website
Uh-huh.
for under affordable housing, Joe Burgess, their planner, gave a presentation in the summer of 2018 on what is sort of this plan. It's changed a little bit, but in that presentation, it's about a 50 or 60-page document. You'll see a series of charts that explain in detail how they get to the 757 with
Okay.
credits and
Thank you.
deductions.
And that has that cheat sheet that you were talking about?
Yes.
Okay, perfect,
And,
thanks.
and Bill, if you've got anyone has got more questions, maybe we can send them to Bob directly, because I think we need to keep moving on. We now know a
Okay.
lot about this
right.
process. Bob, thank you so much. We are grateful, and I think Steve wanted to say, because we're talking an item that's going to be recommended, I think you wanted to speak.
I did, actually.
And then we'll have questions, and then we will have a vote.
And then we'll have a vote.
Okay.
Bob, I really want to thank you for sharing your expertise on the critical factors that are affecting the growth of our community, for sharing your sense of urgency regarding our need as a board to plan for that growth, and your advice as the chair of the committee, on behalf of the committee, that we consider hiring a professional planner to help us with that work. As Beth mentioned, on the agenda tonight is my recommendation that we retain Malone and McBroom as the firm to assist us in this work, to assist us with gathering the data, with engaging the community, and with developing a variety of scenarios that will position us as a board, as a community, to make the very best decisions to plan for this growth and on behalf of the future of our schools and our students. I've come to this recommendation after reflecting really carefully on the questions raised by our community during our last referendum, as well as by reviewing the successful planning work that's happened across the country in places like Cavallo, Oregon, Park City, Utah, Brookline, Massachusetts. Both here at home and in those national examples, there was an emphasis on comprehensive data, on the provision of multiple scenarios, on collaboration with the town, and on the full engagement of the community. And so it's with that emphasis in mind that I'm making the recommendation tonight that we engage the services of a professional planning firm. I realize there are lots of questions that the board may have, certainly questions that members of the community may have. And so I want to spend just a few minutes to define sort of the need, the timing, and the cost associated with employing the services of a planning firm. So need number one. One of the most critical responsibilities that we have as a board, that we share as leaders and as stewards of the school district, is to plan for the future. And as we heard tonight, as I think we're all aware, our district is growing. Between 2013 and 2018, we grew by 359 students, or more than 10%. It was 2% a year, average growth. Current projections from our demographer, and those are still in play, we're making adjustments to those on a regular basis, have us growing conservatively, but about close to 500 students, or more than 12% over the next 10 years. With schools that are already over capacity, and we've talked about that before, we need to plan for that growth, and we need to do so in ways that honor our values of equity, wellness, and educational innovation, as well as our commitments to financial sustainability and community engagement. The issues associated with planning for an additional 400 or 500 students, maybe more, over the next 10 years are complex. And I want to highlight 4 of those issues. Number one, we are likely going to have to deal with redistricting, something that has not been done in Princeton for many years and will have to be done in ways that address not only uneven housing development in our elementary sending areas, but also longstanding racial and economic imbalances. Malone and McBroom specialize in this work, in redistricting. The superintendent in South Windsor, Connecticut, praised them for their detailed analysis of the enrollment impact of every permitted and projected housing development. Malone and McBroom do a lot of work throughout Connecticut, but they also have partners here in New Jersey who understand our schools and our state. We know from Malone and McBroom's presentations to us that they geocode the location of every student and potential future student, which they factor then into their redistricting plans. They've done these redistricting plans for numerous school districts, and we will need the benefit of that experience as we take on the task that will have an emotional impact on our community as well as a practical impact for years to come. Number two, we are likely to have to plan for facility expansion. What will that look like? None of us are approaching this question with preconceived outcomes. Will it be additions to various schools? Will it be a new school? Will it involve a change in grade level bands? How will we consider the developmental needs of our students? How will we consider incorporate educational best practices associated with 21st century learning? What about sustainability? What about tax impact? What about operational costs? And the most important question, how will we engage the community throughout the process so that we have the benefit of their ideas in generating multiple options and so that we can facilitate consensus around the most acceptable pathway forward? This is where Malone and McBroom excel. They were the only firm we interviewed who outlined a clear, multifaceted community engagement strategy. The superintendent in Groton, Connecticut, praised them for their ability to build consensus in his town following a badly failed referendum. In the end, his community in Groton overwhelmingly approved an option that addressed racial imbalances and consolidated 3 substandard schools into 2 new elementary schools. I don't know what a future facilities referendum may look like in Princeton, when it might happen, but I do know that I want us to have all of the options on the table, as well as the documented input from the community so that we can make the most informed decisions possible about the short and long-term steps for cost-effectively addressing the educational needs of the students in this town. Number 3, we are likely to have to consider land acquisition and/or sale. The expansion of our facilities may require additional land. How much and where are fundamental questions. The property associated with Westminster Choir College is fraught with complexity and also possibility. What about other properties either owned by the town or by private entities? And what about Valley Road? This building is an asset, but half of it is condemned. What is its highest and best use? These are questions we're going to have to determine. If we found another location for the administration and transportation in this building, could the building be monetized to offset costs for the purchase of other properties? These are huge questions, the answers to which will affect the landscape in Princeton forever. A professional planning firm will help us identify options and opportunities. It will also engage the community so that there is relative consensus regarding the decisions we ultimately have to make. Issue number 4, we will have to plan in collaboration with the municipality and with other public or private partners. Whatever planning decisions we make as a school district are ones that we cannot make alone. We have to work with partners in the best interests of our students, our community, and all those who are paying taxes. A planning firm will not only help us outline our needs as a school district, but will also help us connect those needs with the needs identified by our town. For example, could our goal of expanding our preschool, something we talked about in the last meeting, align with the town's potential need for a new location for a senior resource center? How does the town's interest in selling Monument Hall and moving the services housed in that building create opportunities for our schools? And what about public-private partnerships? Is there potential for private development and public education to align in ways that might supplement our operating budget? The questions I am posing are big and important. We want to get them right. To help us figure out the right path forward, we brought together a team of incredibly qualified people in our community who have expertise in community planning and in understanding the impact on schools of housing development. You've heard from one of them just tonight. To a person, they advised us to hire a professional planning firm. Our community experts are ready to assist the board as it oversees the work of the firm, but they felt the task was too complex and too important not to have the expertise of a professional planner. I concur with this. We have a responsibility to approach this complex challenge in the right way. I believe that Malone and McBroom can add the professional resources to help us navigate the many dimensions of planning for enrollment growth while allowing our administration and board to maintain our focus on our other very important work, which involves culturally responsive teaching, differentiated instruction, implementation of school-wide enrichment, review of special education services, oversight of all of our referendum projects, and the day-to-day operations of one of the top school districts in the country. We have a lot of balls in the air. We don't want to drop any of them. So why now? What about timing? Second point. Number 1, I have 5 here. Enrollment is growing now and is significantly impacting our schools. Little Brook, and I see some parents from Little Brook here tonight, has a capacity of 341 students, but is currently at 402 and rising. Moreover, Littlebrook is projected to receive the highest number of students in the next few years from the new housing and from new housing, just development within the Littlebrook area, and phase 1 of Princeton's third round fair share housing obligation. There's potentially 70 more students coming in the next few years to a school that's already 60 students over capacity. We may have to consider redistricting options as soon as next year, and we want to make those adjustments as part of a master plan rather than as decisions we will later have to change. The planning for number 2 can begin now to verify our enrollment data and analyze our building capacities. Indeed, I believe the entire long-term planning process will be further strengthened by an outside expert firm that validates the enrollment projections of a professional demographer, as well as the capacity projections of our architect. 3, we do not have to wait until we have the final affordable housing settlement. That settlement might occur in the next month or at some point farther into the future, but the reality is we already have a fairly accurate estimate of the impact, as Bob has outlined tonight, and any adjustments will not significantly affect the projections or change the fundamental need for a planner. Number 4, planning work undertaken now by the district may inform the work the town is also undertaking to update their master plan. One more example of the collaboration we're striving for as a school district and as a community. And 5, the current referendum provides some additional capacity at the middle school and high school, as well as some spaces that allow for the implementation of best practices in 21st century learning. But those capacity increases, as our architect mentioned tonight, help to resolve current overcrowding. They do not solve the core educational and longer-term capacity issues we face as a district. Last point, cost. I believe the cost of the planner is a responsible investment and one we can afford. And I would ask the board and the community to consider the following points. Number 1, the total cost of $143,605 is likely to be reduced after Malone and McBroom can validate all of the work we have done already to analyze enrollments, housing growth, and building capacity. When they gave us their total cost, which is listed in the plan, they generated that cost with the assumption that they would be beginning their work from scratch. In their proposal, however, they note that much of that demographic and capacity analysis has been done already, which is why in their proposal they put that scope of the project, stages 2 through 4, on an hourly schedule. Number 2, as I mentioned at our last meeting, we are fortunate to have received this summer $1.7 million in unanticipated revenue as a result of a one-time increase in our extraordinary aid allocation from the state. This is aid that helps to reimburse some of the funds we used in the prior year to provide services to our students with more profound special needs. That unanticipated revenue, like any unanticipated revenue we receive, was appropriately placed into our fund balance account and can be appropriately allocated for this particular expense. Utilizing the fund balance to hire a planner was a recommendation made by Tom Venanzi, our interim BA, when he was here on his way out, and it is one that's fully endorsed by Matt since he's come on board in the last month. It's important to note that a one-time grant of funds cannot be used to support the hiring or rehiring of permanent staff, as those funds would not be available in future years to maintain those positions. It's also important to note that we have always and will continue to fulfill our legal, educational, and ethical obligation to provide our students with special needs with all the services to which they are entitled. Number 3, if we do move forward with a referendum at some point in the next several years, the cost of the planner can be capitalized as part of that future referendum. So the referendum could be several years out, and we can still capitalize the cost that we would spend now for a planner if it leads to a referendum. Moreover, if the planning costs are part of a referendum, the state will contribute up to 40% of those costs. And finally, where I began, I truly believe that the cost of a planner is an investment. It's an investment in making the right decisions on behalf of our students and on behalf of our community, and it's also an investment in risk management. We all have to keep in mind, and I think we're acutely aware of this on the board, that the cost of setting up a single trailer is approximately $400,000, and the annual cost of renting that trailer is $50,000. I don't want to be playing defense. I don't want to see a trailer on the front lawn of JW or in the parking lot at Littlebrook at a cost of $450,000. If we can spend $140,000 or less than that now, lay out the right ideas, make the right decisions together, and have multiple options that we can present to our community and coalesce around a plan moving forward. So that would be my hope. It's why I'm making the recommendation, and I invite the board or the public to comment before we vote.
So first, does the board want to comment on, have any questions for Steve?
I have some comments. So I am troubled that such an important item like a referendum, like an RFP for a professional planner for future ideas, planning, financial concerns for our district was not reviewed by any of our Board of Education committees. This should have been brought up and discussed and presented to facilities or finance. Why wasn't this done? Isn't this our process? And why are we rushing into this? Why are we not following the process of our committees that we have set up? I was insulted at the M&M presentation on 9/10 when I asked what the cost would be for their work, and the presenters had to look and get approval from Steve and Beth to tell me. I'm an elected board member. Why are they so secretive? This is far from being transparent. We've been working on board goals that state we will use evidence-based decision-making. What evidence did we use here? And if there was evidence, why wasn't it shared with the whole board? Our board goals also state we will communicate in a transparent manner. I feel there is a lot being hidden here and that the whole RFP review and M&M process are far from transparent. And why does the board agenda that you want us to approve tonight already show an increase of $3,605? We're adding space at PHS and JW and with the current referendum. We should slow down and examine this new space accommodation and see if this accommodates our real needs. At this point, we don't even know our needs or growth because the demographer numbers are not out. So why are we moving forward? And have we asked all the planners in Princeton with similar work experience if they agree with this group? Beth has told me several times that the two citizens committees were purely advisory. So how is it that this advisory group, the board is asking the board to approve and spend money that we don't even have? This is not how our board works. And I had sent several emails asking about this, why this wasn't following the board committee, and it wasn't really until Sunday that I got back some information. We are going to approve tonight for special ed $1,097,778,000 tonight, and that's just tonight. We have people coming in and out. I know that you just mentioned about the extraordinary aid. I understand it's not all for special ed. I've heard this and heard this. But we also spoke a lot about putting this money in all our funds to restore them. And, you know, we could have a roof collapse, and if we just have no funds and we're going to just go spend it again. So I'm really concerned about that. I also think in terms of what you said about Littlebrook, at its capacity, we need to close Littlebrook. Anybody who moves in, says they want to go to Littlebrook, we have to say no. We have no more room. I know Johnson Park was down, 17 since the end of last year. Kids need to go elsewhere. Maybe we have to do some rebusing, but there's no reason that any more students should go to Littlebrook right now. So those are my comments about M&M and the process that we went through.
Thank you, Debbie. You've put out a lot of questions there. I want to focus first and foremost on process because that's what this is really all about. And we, as a full board, decided that this decision of looking at a planner was so important that it actually cut across all of our committees, that it went beyond facilities, it went beyond finance, it affected student achievement, it affected equity. And so we deliberately placed people from each of those committees in the group that reviewed the RFP, that had an opportunity to submit questions for the planner, that was invited to be a part of the process where we interviewed for the planner. So. And then we brought the planner in to present to the administration and to those who gathered to do the first interviews. We brought them in again to meet with the full committee, and I think you were part of that on August 14th. We brought them back on September 10th to present to the full board and to the to the public. And so I believe the process has been about as open and transparent as it could be, and that it reflects the magnitude of this, and the importance of this decision by trying to involve all the committees.
We did a lot in this in the summer, and a lot of people weren't here. A lot of people didn't hear them, the other two. You also, and I'm not saying anything about the advisory, but you kept saying their advisory, their advisory. And when I sat in a couple of those meetings, they're so focused on buying Westminster, of hiring this group, buying Westminster. I was like, whoa, slow down. Those are the notes I kept from one of the meetings. I just don't think the board is part of this. I think we're using too much of the outside, and it's frustrating. As an elected person, my job
I
is to
understand you
worry
feel
about
that
the
way.
money. Yeah.
Anyone else like
So I'd
Brian?
like to comment, I absolutely endorse everything that Debbie just said. We talked about the importance of planning, and yet it's not included in this year's budget. We went through a painful budgeting process all last year, and it led up to a 3% reduction in staff. So why wasn't this included in that budget discussion, so we could have the discussion about facilities planning versus teachers and other staff members? So it was not in the budget. How important could it be if it was never brought up as part of the 2019, 2020 budget? $140,000 is a ton of money. Number two is we have a massive referendum, $27 million we're working on today. And it's very challenging. And I hate to see a distraction from that. Number three is parameters. Every time I've shopped for a home, the first question the realtor asks me is, what price range are you in? What can you afford? So we're going to hire this firm. We have not given them any parameters. Could they come back with a referendum or a plan that's unaffordable for our community? Unaffordable for our community capital budget, and maybe unaffordable for our community's operating budget, which is subject to a 2% annual cap increases in the budget. Another point that I'm concerned about is that the fine work, and I thank you, Bob and Ralph, because it is great work, and it stimulates a great and important discussion. But I'm concerned that it doesn't fully capture declining birth rates. Birth rates have been declining very, very rapidly. I was one of 7 in Boston, and we were a small family. And so people are getting married later, they're having children later, and they're having fewer children. So when you look at historical data, and we looked at some birth rates in the Princeton area, birth rates are falling off a cliff. And I'm concerned that our data doesn't fully capture that. Declining birth rates. So we may have fewer kids, fewer school-age kids. So the yield on the multiplier may be overstated. Another point is about immigration. I remember we had wonderful immigration from China, for example. And then for reasons unique to China, that fell off. And of course, our current policies on immigration. So it concerns me that we may not benefit from the robust immigration that makes us a great diverse community that we have benefited from the past. And that could show up in a reduction of school-age children. And my last comment is really about duplication. Our architect, Scott Downey, and his firm, Spiesel, and other firms did a lot of work on planning as part of the $130 million proposed referendum. And now it feels to me that we're starting anew, and we're spending a whole ton of money to get them up to speed on the work that's been done in the past. So I'm in strong favor of planning, but I want to build on what's been done in the past, cost effectively, and I want to go through a budgeting process. So I would like to defer this to our 2020-2021 budget. Let's see how it compares to our other priorities. We have huge priorities in our school district. And to evaluate one on a standalone basis makes no sense to me. I want to evaluate it in the context of all our other priorities. So I want to defer this plan till our next budgeting cycle. And there's one other point, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Brian, did you want to
Yeah.
speak?
So I respect the comments made. I totally disagree with most of them. I believe this has been a very transparent process. I think that, the goal that everybody running last year agreed on of getting citizens actively involved, to share their expertise, to take advantage of the amazing talent that we have in our community. This is the first great example of that happening. And the people on the committee are among the leaders in their field. It's really quite a remarkable group, and I'm very grateful to them for the significant amount of time and effort they contributed, and will continue to contribute as volunteers, and we'll need them if we move forward with this, which I hope we will. I am, in terms of declining birth rates, it's in the demographer's report. I've been through it very closely several times. There are marginally declining birth rates, but we're adding, more than 1,000 units. And we're seeing great turnover in many of our neighborhoods, and talking about zoning changes. The council's talking about various zoning changes. So the small drop-off in birth rates in Princeton is overwhelmed by the other sorts of growth. So I'm not, that's a point that I disagree with. In terms of the source of funds, the $1.7 million of excess revenue was above that which is budgeted. So that wasn't in the budget. And $500,000, if I recall correctly, is going into a capital reserve fund that had been depleted. So we have the reserves to fix a roof or do something else, and then we have more than $1 million for the district and the board to have sit there, because more reserves are better than fewer reserves, or to use for the highest, best use. And I think this is that. And if somebody came to me a month from now and suggested that we might use these funds for something else very compelling that would be in the interests of our school children and our teachers, like an audit for special education, I would be inclined to support that, because I think that would be a great use of these funds. I would push back very, very hard about deferring this work. Betsy and I were at Little Brook yesterday, and I had a chance to talk to some of the PTO leaders and parents. There are 61 students over capacity. They have lost their computer room, they have lost their Spanish room. A closet that had been converted to an AIS room is now an office, and gym has been reduced to once a week, although it's a longer period. I don't think we can wait. I just don't think we can be responsible and do our duty and kick this can down the road. I do agree that a lot of great work was done, and that's the very first thing Malone and McBroom is going to do. They're going to collect, review, and validate all of the existing data. They're going to look at the studies. They're going to get any new data that comes in. For example, if there is an affordable housing settlement in 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks, that gets plugged right in. It plugs into Bob's model, gets plugged into Malone and McBroom's models. They're going to clearly explain to us what the needs are. They're going to explore options to address the needs. And the most important thing for me that they're going to do is substantially engage the community. If there's one thing I heard last year was how important it is to substantially engage the community, to get those ideas, to consider all ideas as good ideas, and to really evaluate them. There are going to be public meetings. This firm does surveys. Steve did extensive reference checks and got back. This was one thing of the many things they excelled at. This was one that was called out as something they were truly exceptional at. Then we identify the most promising ideas. We provide clear information about capital and operating costs for all the viable options, and we don't need to do a thing. We can take all that information and say, now is not the time, or we can say, maybe we want to talk to the community about some small part of this, or maybe we want to be more ambitious. That's just not something that gets determined now. So personally, I think this is an incredibly cost-effective investment, and I'm not willing to continue to put more kids in classrooms where our great teachers, while at the very same time we're telling them to focus on knowing every child. If I put 16 students in a second grade classroom, the teacher has a much better opportunity to know every child than if I give them 25. And I don't know that we can solve some of these challenges in a year or 2 years, but we have to get started now. And personally, I think it would be irresponsible of me not to want to move forward with this and continue to make sure that the community is fully engaged and that it's their voices that need to be heard. And ultimately, it's the community's decision about what to do that we will act on.
Thank you, Brian. Greg?
I was elected 3 years ago. 3 years ago, when I came on the board, I heard that one of the challenges facing us is the overcrowding in our schools and the fact that our schools are becoming very close to being at or over capacity in each one of our schools. 3 years later, every year, our student population has grown. Every year, we've become more overcrowded. This year, we're seeing the fruits of that in specific schools, which are having a real impact on our students and on those families. I have to agree with my colleague, Brian. I don't want to sit here and kick the can down the road again, because it takes time to come up with the right solution. What I was excited about when I was privileged to hear from Mylone and McGroom was their emphasis on community engagement. And one thing that I heard over and over again over the last 2 years was engage the community. Let the community, let our stakeholders understand all the options. Let's figure it out together. This is our opportunity to do just that. We said at the beginning of this year, we're going to take a step back, think about it, think about the best way of making a decision together with all of us involved. And I am so excited about the possibility of bringing a firm in that has the background of doing this type of planning, that has the sophistication to think about redistricting, rebanding, lots of different options. There's no preconceived notion, but what I do know is the time to act is upon us. And I cannot, in good conscience, say, let's put it off one more year. I think the time to act is now, and I think this firm is the way to bring us all together and to think about it together.
Thank you. Evelyn?
I think there's one thing. Bill, you're welcome to go. All right. One thing I'd just like the whole board to consider is the historical place and how we got here. For those of you that were on the board and remember a time when our public was strongly challenging us for over-enrollment, and our board and people who were not on the board then and are on the board now were saying that they didn't trust the numbers. They didn't agree with those enrollment numbers. And very astute people that are out in our audience today were very kind, but very, very strongly saying, you really need to get good advice. You really need to bring someone in that has the capacity to give you the information that you need. That's what the public asked us to do, and they did not mince words. The public also asked us to be transparent. We're working diligently on that. But I agree with Debbie on slowing down. But my connect for that is that when you initiate and engage a firm like this, you are essentially slowing down. We have a referendum that's moving. We backed off. The public said, this 125 thing, you don't have your head around this. We'll agree to 25 and let you get started, but you need to take a step back and you need to get some expert advice. We'll help you, which they have. But now you need to take a step back and you need to really engage someone that knows what they're doing. I don't know who we can give each person around this table to trust. This company has experience. They have planned with different districts. We have examples. We have resumes. They've come. They've presented. They've done everything we've asked us to do. I think the most important thing about this company is this board to, with all the love in my heart, ask more questions than any board that I've ever seen. Ask very, very good questions because they're a bunch of really smart, really good people. The only way we're going to be able to satisfy the public, which is also very smart, very astute, and people that I know and that I trust, the only way we're going to be able to satisfy them in this process for the things we're going to be asking, and to satisfy this board that questions, probably to nauseam to some of us, but in a good way, with a good heart and with good passion, is to initiate a company that has the depth and breadth to answer the questions that we don't have today, but that Michelle's gonna have later. And you know she is. And that if we start making changes to this district, we have to be able to defend that. We can't defend that by the 10 of us. We need an army like this that can support us with data. We promised in our goals to be data-driven. You can't be data-driven by hodgepodging what you're doing to the district. You need a master plan. These people can afford us that. The money is there for us to use. If we get a referendum, that money we will get back 60% from the state. So you cannot be penny wise and dollar foolish on a master plan. 60%, that's how it works. By failing to plan, we are planning to fail. I wholeheartedly support this from the district. Given the size of our budget, this is a monetary expense we would be irresponsible not to do.
Thank you, Evelyn. I just would correct, the state reimbursement, I think, is up to 40% of the capitalized fund. Probably a little less.
I
than-
apologize,
just
40%.
to be
We pay
clear.
60, they
That's
pay
okay.
40, but it's
Thank you.
something, it's a
Thank
deal.
you. I appreciate that.
Sorry.
Who would like to say something? Bill?
I guess I feel like approaching this a number of ways. I feel like it's 2 years ago, and I'm 2 years younger, and starting out again with this, and I feel like we might be making some of the same mistakes where if our numbers aren't closer to being finalized, people will be complaining because we'll be updating things as we get more accurate information. I feel like we're close to having the affordable housing, and actually Bob really helped me feel more comfortable with that, but the demographers report, I haven't seen that. I'd like to see that closer to being finalized before we move on this, because to the extent we change anything, I felt like last time people were not happy. They complained that, what's the real number? Why you keep changing? Do your people not know what they're doing? So I'd like to actually have closer to final numbers. That's one part of what I'm considering. Also, looking at I'll admit, I'm not going to really consider anything after 2025, so I'm just looking at now to 2025, and I see the high school increasing by maybe 35 students. And I think our enrollment probably varies over the course of a year by that much. I don't remember what it drops towards the end of the years when people start moving away, but I don't remember what that number is, but I feel like that's a real small number, especially because we're expanding the high school to increase the capacity by, I believe, over 100. JW, 47, I mean, that's more, but we are increasing the capacity at JW. 104 split by 4 elementary schools, 25. I understand that Little Brook's overcrowded. I'm not seeing the crisis today. The kids I have at the high school don't complain about the overcrowding. They complain about the classes they couldn't take because the classes are not being offered, and I guess I'm understanding that to be a lack of teachers, complaining about not being able to take two science classes this year, when 2 years ago I know they were, and I think that's maybe teachers more than capacity. So, and the third thing along this is that I read the M&M presentations and reports, and they were really good, and I could see they would be a good one to use maybe 3 or 4 months from now, have some finalized numbers. And then, I don't know, I am kind of, 140,000 is a lot of money. And I have trouble spending that unless we're really, really at the right time to spend it, that all the stars align, we have all the numbers we need and we're really close to being able to jump forward, and I don't know, I kind of feel like we should see maybe 6 months from now, do we have better numbers? I'd even rather wait for the JW and high school expansions to be completed and see how that all works. But
Thank you, Bill. Michelle?
Oh, you sure? Okay. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Powell and his committee because I know a lot about affordable housing and I learned something tonight. And I also want to point out that this town is run by volunteers. That's how things get done. The health, the Board of Health, the rec committee, planning board, zoning board, all the major decisions that happen in this town are made by volunteers. In fact, we're volunteers. So to suggest that we are not getting the highest quality advice, counsel, and information from our volunteers demonstrates a lack of how this town works. So I want to start by saying that, and again, to express my appreciation. I think that one of the things that's important to me is Evelyn is absolutely right. I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to want them answered. And I spent all of last year asking questions and complaining and voting against things because we didn't have a plan. We didn't know what we were doing. I didn't have confidence. And so now here we are. We have the opportunity not to wait to think that the numbers are magically going to change or we're going to actually get things that we can, numbers that we can rely on. We're never going to have that. But our job as elected officials is to, with the best information that we have at this particular time, to go forward and start thinking about what might happen and what can we do and what our options are. And I feel a heck of a lot better about taking some action and dealing with people who have that experience in planning than I have in relying on anecdotal information, which is kind of how we were proceeding before. So our job as a governance board is to make those kinds of decisions. I don't like spending $140,000 either, but I'd rather do that than make an $130 million mistake. So that's kind of where I am. I think that this is something we should proceed on. I don't think we benefit by waiting. And I think that these numbers, one thing we know, there are going to be more kids. So if we can first of all, do a better job of estimating things based on something as opposed to us guessing, I'm in favor of that. And then I won't neglect that I also want to be sure that all voices in this town are heard. All voices are not in this room. The population of this town is not reflected in this room, and dollars to donuts, they're not watching us online either. So one of the things I want to make sure of, and this company assured me that they will reach into every neighborhood, in every population, in every demographic, and get those voices. That's not something that 10 of us can do. So I'm in favor of getting some planning work done so that we can start thinking practically about how we go forward.
Thank you, Michelle. Betsy?
Thank you. I have a very, very quick statement. This is something not everyone in the room knows. This is a very engaged board. I'm not speaking for anyone other than myself, but I really, truly believe all 10 of us do agree fundamentally that it's our responsibility to look to and plan for the future. We just might differ on how we think that should be done, and this is made even more difficult in a fiscally challenging year, which is the type of year that we find ourselves in. But that said, a very basic process question that I've heard and I think should be articulated is related to defining the scope of work. So should the planner be approved tonight, when and how does the board get the opportunity to define what the scope of work would be and how are parameters set within budget and other constraints that we know that we have moving forward?
So one of the things that, and the scope of the work they laid out, they have 9 stages. There's that first stage is sort of that preliminary stage where they come in and they meet with us and they kind of get the lay of the land here in Princeton. We talk to them about our hopes, our expectations, some of our concerns. They talked about having an advisory committee of up to 20 to 25 people. They were excited when we talked about the group that we already have started, and they said that could be a core group, and then we can expand that group with people who represent families with young children, seniors with no longer have children in the system, to make sure that we have all voices heard in that advisory group. And that group will help with the board to establish those parameters. It's going to be one of the things I heard from the superintendent in Groton. He was new when he got to the district. He thought that the employees from Mylone and McBroom were actually employed by the school district because they attended every single meeting. They were at every single event. There was this sort of constant communication with the administration, with the board. There was the superintendent in South Windsor. Their enrollment was constantly shifting. They kept coming back with new updates, new information, new presentations. So they're the kind of firm that I think engages very quickly, and they want to listen. That's their job. They want to listen to what our parameters are.
Iterative process that the board and the community helps to define.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
I remember the third time we heard them, they were very clear that they are here, they would be here to help us determine where we want to go. They don't have any preconceived notion. They're here as a tool, as a resource, and they say, we, the board, will set the parameters. We will say, what are our financial constraints? This is one of the things we have, this complex problem as a board and as a community. This is not building another building in a cornfield. We've got a built-out environment, we've got budgetary restrictions, we've got different buildings that we need to address, we've got population we're trying to get a handle on, we've got a lot of moving things, we've got a time element, we know we have debt that comes off in 2 to 3 years, and we've got to think about the tax burden to our taxpayers. There's all these different dimensions. And so we can put all of those into the parameters and say, this is the complex puzzle, and lead us through it, right? Otherwise, I don't see how we do that as 10 volunteer board members. I think we need to have the resources of a professional firm that can help us find our way through this puzzle with the community's help.
When will the demographer's report be ready? Do we know?
Ralph? Can I? Can ask Ralph.
The issue with the demography report is that I think you got a summary of where we came out on how to project the next 10 years in enrollment, not looking just at affordable housing, but the whole range. The problems are two. Number one, we wanted to get from Steve the final enrollment count for this year before we proceeded forward. But secondly, there is an issue still in dispute in the affordable housing negotiations with the court, which frankly we should not foul up by talking about publicly, because it's the town that's negotiating that, and that's an issue that's back and forth, and that would affect some of the numbers significantly. And somebody already said we shouldn't put out a projection that we then change a few weeks later. So that's why when we gave you the preliminary estimate of what we have, we said we shouldn't put out a final public projection until we have that final decision. We're hoping that we'll get it next month, but that may be optimistic given the way the court's functioning. But our hope is within a few weeks, you'll have that number. Now, I might say that basically where we've come out in projecting using 2 different methodologies pretty much tracks what Bob was describing to you as the trend in housing units. It's pretty much that same percentage in terms of the increase of students that we see, but we've broken it down by grade and so on.
So at one point you guys had 4 different ways you were doing it. Now we're down to 2?
Yeah. Yep.
Yep.
Down to
Okay.
2. Yeah.
And also, when he says the numbers from you,
Where's the question coming from?
Right
oh,
here.
I'm still here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So at one point you guys had 4 different ways you were calculating the numbers, and now you're looking at just 2 ways. Okay. And when you say the numbers from Steve, those are the October 15 numbers? Is
Correct.
that what he's waiting for?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
the snapshot in time that demographers use throughout the state every year.
And so after you get those on October 15th, how long until we would see something?
Well, we're still waiting for the court decision. Of course, I can't tell you when that's
But the court decision sounds to me could be 3 years.
No, it's really going to be the obligation out longer term. The numbers that we have now will probably pretty much track with what Bob just shared with you within that 10-year time frame.
10.
The 10-year frame, the next 10 years.
Right.
That's what he was sharing with you. Our projections cover that same time period. But we also wanted to look, if we could, beyond that. And so that court decision affects some of that. And that's why we said we shouldn't give you a final projection until you get that, because for capital planning, you need to look even beyond the 10 years. And the court decision will have an important implication for us. So.
Thank you. I just want to say it's Ralph Widener, who's the chair of our enrollment committee. Thank you, Ralph. So we've heard from the board. I think, is it time? Can we open it up? Yeah, we keep going here. Appreciate our communities waiting very patiently. If anyone would like to make a comment on this particular item, on the hiring of a district planning consultant, if they would step up to the podium at this time, we would like to limit that to 3 minutes. Please state your name and address, and welcome.
And as we're doing that, I'm going to give you a 30-second heads up, so 2.5 minutes.
Again, we
and
do
then
ask,
stop at
try
3.
to respect the fact that we are running late and we've got a whole nother, the rest of our agenda to go. 2 students who need to go to. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Kip.
Hi, I'm Kip Cherry, 24 Dempsey. I'm a professional planner in New Jersey. I'm AICP. I've been doing planning for a long time. And in fact, I followed Bob right there at the Economic Development Authority. I think he left and I arrived a month later. I think I would like to have us postpone for a few months. I agree with a lot of the comments that have been made. I feel that we should get the good numbers from the court decision. I also think we need numbers from the university regarding their projections on their and the timing on their enrollment increases. I think that's been a lot of stimulation in our community. I think that we should look at more of a micro situation as to where we are right now. We have a few immediate needs, it appears. We have what we believe to be some crowding at a couple of elementary schools. I think that we need to look at the busing issue because, and I'm not sure how flexible, whether there's a deadline issue that, but it seems as though that might solve some of the problem. And I'd like to look at micro addition at 1 or 2 of the elementary schools. And I think I'm just afraid that we're going to go into this long planning activity that will just go on forever and not end up with real good answers. And I think that we know some of the questions right now, and we should handle our immediate needs and then get into long-term planning. I'm all for long-term planning, believe me. But I think that 1 or 2 small additions might really make a big difference. And I think that, Bob's numbers have suggested this, that the increase in enrollment is going to be over a long term. And I think that we're in sort of a bit of a panic here, thinking that we're going to have all these kids coming in immediately. I think we have some immediate numbers, and I think that it's going to be much longer before all of these other numbers materialize. These things take a long time to implement. Zoning changes, getting contractors, all the rest of it. So I think you'd be better off waiting a little bit and then initiating a much more focused process. And I think you need a scope that's very focused, because you can spend a lot of money on a lot of discussions and really have not too much to show for it. And I'm not sure you're going to get all that much public input, because if there's nothing distinct to react to, then the public doesn't have anything really to work with. I think we need a better needs assessment than we have of what we really need in our schools, with more participation from the faculty. And I think that we need to see what's happening with John Witherspoon and the high school in terms of the additions that we're doing there. So I think there's a lot in the works already. And I do think that we should take a breath. And I do think $140,000 is quite a bit. And that could be used for doing a good building program and a design for a couple of micro additions. Thank you.
Thanks, Kip.
Jian Chen. I know we're late, but when I was listening to Debbie and Brian, Dan talking about proper engagement in the board process, I couldn't help think of a thing I talk to my really young kids. I always tell them, it's not up to you to say whether your fart is stinky or not. It's the people around you. So when it comes to engagement, if someone feel that he or she, or even the public, they're not properly engaged, I say, let's respect their feeling. So for me, I think perhaps I'm in an interesting position to talk about this enrollment future, because many of you might not be aware that I'm a member of the Future Enrollment Committee. And so first, I want to say that I'm two hands, if not four, for supporting the planning process. I think it's just common sense that if we plan to engage in any long-term capital investment, a thorough planning is great, is wonderful. To the extent that process can engage the public, bring more transparency to the process, it's all great, it's wonderful. And but I think I do have a little bit issue with the timing. I think many of the speaker probably pointed out the issue that we have two critical missing pieces of information before the consultant can start their work. I have the consultant's proposal here with me, and it looks to me that the 7-month project, the month 1 and month 2, will immediately be housing, demographic, economic analysis, and second is comprehensive enrollment analysis and projection. Now we heard Ralph spoke about the lack of COA final settlement decision and how much that will sway the overall decision of the overall sort of projection of the enrollment for the next 5, 10 years and beyond. I think that's a critical piece of information. And according to various reports, it seems to be around the corner, maybe forever. But that is indeed important information. Why? Because when you actually read the consultant's proposal, you actually try to present the public 3 scenarios of the enrollment growth in the future. It's probably a low case basics and higher case, right? So why it is important? Because the affordable housing plan, the final settlement, will have a significant bearing on the numbers. To the extent we have a low and high projection that gives you, say, a 5% growth versus a 35% growth. That deliverable actually is really of not much great value if you look at, if we say all the purpose of this consulting project is to help us to prepare the contingency. So to this extent that we have information coming in that will help us to narrow that range of possibility, I think we can afford a couple of months to see that number coming in and help us to make better decisions and hopefully maybe better define the scope of the work of the consultants. So that's my view. Lastly, I thought about this really, really long and hard. I try to think whether should I say or not. I know that it's going to stir some nerve, but since we're looking into 10 years and beyond, I remember last year when we looked at the cranberry situation, it always felt to me that we waited really, really late to engage this public discourse a few months before the contract expires, right? Now, since we already entered into this renewed agreement, and we're probably 9 years away from the expiration day, can we take a look at how the cranberry situation plays into our next 10 years of growth? And by the way, Ralph mentioned that that preliminary enrollment projection number. As a member of the enrollment committee, I would like to see that number firmed up before it released to public. but since I think Steve already mentioned some numbers out there, I just want to remind everybody that the original enrollment projection projected 700 to 800 students growth, enrollment growth for the next 10 years. I think the preliminary number is about half of that. So in that context, the 280 students from Cranberry seems pretty significant to me. So I think that's something that we should take into consideration when we vote on this consulting project, and when I understand that the consultants are pretty happy to expand their work of mandate, and maybe that's something that we should seriously consider.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak?
Hi, I'm Tara Oakman. I live down the road on Valley Road, and I have 2 third graders at CP. And they also have gym only once a week now, and I didn't understand why until you said that, Brian. Now I get it. It's because we also, I mean, no one's talking about CP, but it feels really crowded there too. I wasn't planning to speak tonight because to me this planning feels like a no-brainer after watching this debate for the last couple of years. I feel really grateful that you all are considering this thoughtful, data-driven process with meaningful community engagement. The community engagement is really hard. I mean, that's obvious, right? Because you meet here on Tuesday nights when most of us want to be in bed, and we're the ones that are here. So how are we going to get people to represent the whole community? Really getting back to the point that I know you all care about the most, which is about equity. How do we make sure that everybody is getting a fair opportunity to have the best education possible here? And it's really hard to do that and design the facilities in the best way possible without getting that engagement. So I'm really excited that you found a firm that is going to help you with that. So I think that's all I'll say. Thanks for considering it, and hope you vote for it.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Yes, Michelle.
Is the consultant contract time constrained? In other words, is it for a specific term?
No.
Not to my knowledge, no. They just have a scope of work.
Okay.
Well, it does say up until 1 year, right? It does say it would end September 23rd, 2020.
So under the person, when we're hiring them as a professional service, which by law can only be 1 year, so we would extend that scope. Not the dollars, but the time frame, because by law it's only allowed to be entered into for 1 year.
So what I want to ask is since there seems to be some concern that we are moving too fast, which I vehemently disagree with, but I would also like to see as much consensus on this board around hiring this firm. I'd be interested, and I'll address my colleagues directly, those who had some concern about time, how much time are we talking about? How long do you want to wait?
I guess the gentleman that just previously spoke 2 people ago, I like his idea of trying to get some firmer numbers. I do feel like last time the demographer's report was being updated as we got more accurate data, but yet it was interpreted that the numbers were wrong. And I would like to have some firmer numbers so that the numbers stay the same for a while and people go, okay, I like it. I keep seeing the same numbers. And so it could be a month, it could be a couple months.
So let me answer the question, if I could, a slightly different way. My interest is more in narrowing the scope. We're expanding the middle school capacity, we're expanding the high school capacity, and I do want us to address the elementary schools. I'm very concerned about Little Brook in particular, and I agree with Debbie about putting a cap on that, and I agree with Steve about redistricting. 3 of our 4 elementary schools, including CP, have some room for expansion. And let's say, hypothetically, we added 10 classrooms.
That's beyond the scope of the
Okay,
question, though.
anyway, so let me just finish my sentence. I would rather narrow the scope to the next 5 years. And believing Bob's numbers, there's a lot of emphasis on the elementary schools. So I really want to narrow the scope, focus on the elementary schools over the next 5 years while we develop a vision of what education will look like and what our numbers are in years 5 through 10.
And that's actually what I understood we'd be able to do. If we approve this planning firm, then it's our job to come together and say, well, we wrote up an RFP, here's what it looks like, but what do we, now we've heard all of these presentations, what do we actually want you to look at? And what are we most concerned about? And what is the budget within which we work, which we know is a reality for us? So that's partly what I understand.
No, I know. I just think that that's putting the cart before the horse. You know, in other words, I think we should narrow the focus, which would also help us narrow the cost, and narrow the time frame. In other words, as Bill pointed out, the numbers for the next 5 years are more reliable than the numbers of 6 through 10. So I want to break the planning process into two. Narrow the focus, concentrate on the shorter term, particularly the elementary schools where we think the growth is at, while we're completing the referendum on the other schools, and then develop a vision about years 6 through 10.
Just to follow up on Michelle's, I think, good thought there. If we voted to approve tonight, when would they begin? Most firms need some time to hit the ground. That's part one of the question. And the second part is if we voted to hire them tonight, could we tell them we want them to begin on a particular date, like November 1st or November 15th, to provide more time to get the numbers?
We could.
And could we narrow the scope? We'd be hiring them for up to $143,000, but could we, once we engage them, actually revise that downward?
I would have to be honest and say they want to do a full process that involves community engagement. So when you say narrow the scope,
Well,
what do you?
Looking at 1 to 5 years versus 1 to 10, so that may not change the cost. The process may be the same. So that's what I'm hearing from my colleagues, that looking further ahead may not be something they're as interested in as looking more, immediately, and whether or not that even affects the cost.
Greg, let's begin.
I was going to ask my colleagues to think about it a little bit differently. Comprehensive planning is powerful because you're starting by a completely wide scope. There's so many different options on the table. There's so many different ways we can approach it because there's so many different moving variables. And I'd be worried about having us narrow the scope before we even know what all the options are. And so in my previous position, my boss always said, you have a toolbox. You want that toolbox to have as many tools as possible. And then you think through how you put the tools together. You stack them. And you think about what's needed for that specific community. We're a very specific community with a number of issues. Financial, you're absolutely right, but also planning. And I want us to plan for the short term, but in the context of thinking what's best for this community 50 years from now. And this is our opportunity to do all that. And so I'd be loath or hesitant to have us try to narrow the options down before we even know what the options are, because I want all of us, the community and the board, and all of us together at the table to see and think through all the options and have someone sort of give us the different tools that we can use.
Can I just add one thing? Can I add one thing? I want to say that
Nope, you're the board president. You have to listen.
I've been listening, and as members of the Board of Education, we are obligated to take data-driven decisions after consultation with the people who they impact. And on my time on the board these past 2 years, I've heard so many different ideas and suggestions, and I want to build this, and I want to expand that, and why can't we do this, and board, you didn't think about that, and by the way, the demographics keep moving, and we don't believe the numbers, and blah, blah, blah. And even sitting through in the enrollment committee meetings as I'm doing, which I'm so grateful for those volunteers, but I listen to that, and I think, I don't follow all this math, and then it comes out here, and we get a number back, and I look at Steve and I say, they're projecting something that we already exceeded. Right. These numbers are all over the place, and I want to have data. I want to have verified data, and I want professional advice that is going to tell me that the data we're using is good. And I don't think any of us sitting around this table are in a position to do that, and God bless our volunteers, and they're doing their best, but they're not in a position to do that either. And so I really, personally, I don't want to come to the community with any sort of proposal that hasn't been verified and that I understand completely. I went through last year. It was a very uncomfortable process, and I really feel like we have to just back up and get the resources in place to try to solve this problem, but with verified professional advice. That's what I think, but.
So I'm confused, Steve. When Betsy asked you about the cost, we are stuck with 9 months at 143, whatever, 650? Yes or no? Like, that's where I'm getting lost. Like, you say they're going to use our demographers' numbers. You say they're going to use some of this other work.
That's the variable, would be the enrollment and capacity analysis that we've already done. Once they see how much groundwork has already been done, they may be able to scale back the
Maybe, not definitely.
Not definitely, the scope of that work. I want to be honest, though. I mean, I think that this is it's an investment, and it's a process of looking at all the options. So, to your question, Betsy, I'm hoping we would get like a range, like a plan of options that would be some short-term redistricting, some longer-term redistricting, some short-term addition possibly, some longer-term solutions. And then as a board and as a community, we get to, you can choose, like, these are the options we want to implement now. This is the options we might want to reserve for future years. But the process, the 7-month process, at whatever cost it's not going to exceed $143,000, is going to give us that plan. And then we can decide as a board and as a community what we want to implement.
But that's where it's tough, because when I sat there, and they also said we could use some of your stuff, and now it's and I'm hearing really now, it's going to be 143, and they're not going to be able to use what other stuff we've done. So, Michelle, when you asked me, the demographer stuff would be great, because right now we literally have no idea.
So waiting 30 days?
No, it's more than that for me. It's way more. I'm really frustrated and struggling with the whole fund, the reserve funds, and the fact that, I know, Brian, we sat in this finance meeting, we were all very excited to put money back in because we had brought them so far down, and because of our budget, and we had to lay off because we had no more money. And I'm telling you, March is coming, and we're going to hit the same thing. And so I'm not ready for that part. I'm not ready to jump into that until we have better control of our budget.
Understood, and my question was about a short delay.
Yeah, no, I know.
So-
I'm telling you,
Right,
yeah.
okay, nope, thank you, I understand.
One thought, on Betsy's, that I think one of the mistakes we made in the last one was we saw these beautiful drawings, we saw the beautiful car, but we didn't know the price. And it was when, I think, sitting in facilities meeting, that we got this huge spreadsheet, and I quickly turned to the last page and I saw 139 million. I didn't write DOA, but that was what I thought was it ain't gonna pass. And we started whittling it down, and I'm worried that they may give us another Taj Mahal, which is a field in the air sort of beautiful plan that I love, but that will go nowhere because of the cost. So I feel like, to Betsy's point, we got to somehow say we can pass a $30 million referendum, and that's what you got to work with, or we can pass 130 or a 230. Somehow we have to give them a number.
They do the survey work they'll talk to us, and then they'll do a survey early on with various options to get feedback that will inform us as to what the community is telling us is reasonable based on the options that are laid out. So we have a lot of control over that.
Yeah. Okay, and I saw that in the report where they had done the surveys and they were talking about the tax increase and what people were willing to support. But I feel like we should, as Betsy's saying, sort of give them a guideline. If we pass it today, we have to give them a guideline that certain things aren't going to fly here.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's been really robust conversation, but I'd like to call the question.
Thank you. Second? Okay. Okay, we have a motion. I need a motion to approve.
I move that we approve the engagement of Malone and McBroom as recommended by the superintendent.
And do I have a second? Okay, can I call the question then to a vote? All in favor, raise your hands. Do we want to do this by roll call, because it's a contentious decision? Let's do a roll call.
Absolutely. Yes.
Well, it's a
Very
collegial, we're having a great
collegial.
debate. I don't
Very
need to.
collegial. Beth Barrand,
Yes.
Debbie Bronfeld,
No.
Dan Dart,
No.
Bill Hare,
Not today. No.
Betsy Calber-Baglio,
Yes.
Brian McDonald,
Yes.
Greg Stankiewicz,
Yes.
Michelle Tuck-Ponder,
Yes.
Evelyn Spahn.
Yes.
All right, motion passes.
Thank you all for a very healthy, respectful discussion, and I'm glad we brought a lot of issues out, and hopefully that will inform how we move forward on this. My counsel informs me we have to be finished by midnight.
Yeah.
Thank you, Council.
So we're gonna keep going. And next, our committee reports, and is there a way we can abbreviate our committee reports, or do we need to do them in full? Good idea, though. Do we want to submit, why don't we let our student committee members go first? Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Just to reintroduce ourselves to those of you who may not have been here in the meetings prior to the beginning of the school year, my name is Charlie Biggs, and I'm a senior at Princeton High School.
My name is Mateo Constantine. I'm also a senior at Princeton High School.
So for our first official report as liaisons to the school board, we thought we would begin by just defining what our role is as student body liaisons, and then running through some of the issues and ideas that Student Council wants to prioritize in the coming school year. And then we wanted to wrap up by just filling you in on what Student Council is working on right now. So in our opinion, Princeton High School student body liaisons are a critical part of the Student Council. The program creates a platform with which Student Council and, more importantly, members of the student body can advocate for the issues they're facing firsthand. And these are issues that may not be immediately apparent to faculty, staff, and other non-students. These are issues that the student body feels would make improvements to their ever-important high school years. So it's also important that the student body liaisons work to ensure that the student body itself stays in the loop with the initiatives and the actions of the board. This year, we're going to put an extra focus on the former. So we want to conduct surveys to let students decide which issues should be discussed at board meetings, or which issues we are going to discuss at board meetings. We want to treat student council meetings more like forums at which members of the student body are free to come, participate, and voice their own opinions. And we're going to base our monthly reports on what we gather from increased interaction with both with the student body and more meetings with student council. And I think I should mention that we bring up the following issues not solely to just show what we've been working on or what we have done, but because there's some of the issues that we feel are most necessary to be addressed and that we feel should be discussed here. So with that, I'll go into some of the issues that we focused on. So last Friday, September 20th, the Student Council convened to discuss which issues were most important to the student body and to decide where we should focus our efforts this year. Topping the list was the most frequently voiced issue, parking. So parking permits were recently distributed to members of the senior class, and of course, only I think 80 were issued. So a lot of people were left without permits. Space is at a premium, and we recognize that this topic has been discussed at previous meetings, and it was even touched on today. But seeing as it was the #1 concern of the student body, we still considered it worth mentioning. And as of now, student council is just encouraging people to either carpool or take the bus, just any alternatives to driving alone. I should also mention that a few students expressed concern that a lot of the lot on Franklin Avenue across from Avalon is largely empty or partially empty in the mornings and remains that way throughout the school day. A lot of the underclassmen were wondering why that area of the lot remains unfilled, and some students without permits were wondering why they're being prevented from parking there. So we just thought that we should bring up the issue of parking. Another issue that the student body really wants to have addressed is the hyper-competitive atmosphere and stress culture that exists at Princeton High School. A lot of students have expressed concern that this environment contributes to increasing issues regarding mental health, and they complain that not enough is being done to support students who feel overwhelmed or exhausted. So we've come up with a few ways to respond to this issue. So first off, the first thing that people say when they talk about what we can do to address this stress is that homework-free weekends need to be enforced and should be expanded to more holidays, including situations where we have one day off in the middle of the week. I think the closest one is Yom Kippur. And then a more long-term solution, a lot of students expressed interest in having days off or at least breaks from homework during widely celebrated holidays like the Chinese New Year or Diwali. And Student Council has planned several voluntary activities that just serve as a chance to unwind and take focus off of work, even if for just a short period of time. And this was brought up some people were concerned with this at the last meeting because they were saying that it's just piling up more activities. But all of these activities are voluntary. They're designed to relieve stress and they're not supposed to be seen as tasks that are supposed to add on to what students are already expected to accomplish. And just to list some of these events that are currently in the works include a mini golf tournament, trivia nights, reviving the Mr. PHS pageant, and a March Madness watch party in the auditorium, among many other things.
Okay. Yes.
Sorry. What would you guys think of if we only let you take one AP a year?
Honestly, I think that would be a problem.
Okay, well, you have to help us.
Yeah, so
When we look at this, hyper-focused student
people,
stress.
okay, so people,
People
okay,
will
it's tough
study
because-
themselves, because Dr. Carell
Yeah.
has told us.
Yeah.
But I'm
You
just
can-
saying,
you can
we've
think
talked
about
a
that.
lot about that
Yeah.
in student achievement,
mean,
limiting, maybe two, okay?
I think
Limiting.
maybe limiting would be a good idea in a freshman or sophomore year, but I think especially in junior year or senior year when the APs that you can choose from, there's a longer list, and obviously when people are trying to build their resume for college, I think it would create a lot of problems if we were to limit it in junior and senior year, maybe freshman year, although freshmen don't take that many APs in the first place. I don't know. I think
I was gonna say, I mean, in terms of what you could do for the underclassmen is kind of encourage them possibly to take maybe less excelled or AP classes, especially if they're under a lot of stress. Or, I mean, a lot of kids have after-school activities such as sports. I mean, if you're a club leader, that's a big responsibility. So in cases like that, I would say, I mean, it really depends on where you are. And high school, like Charlie said, as a junior, that's the year, high school, colleges are kind of really keying in on it, and you have to really shine. So I think it really can depend. There's no really right way to answer that.
But you're falling into it.
I mean, personally, I only took, I'm going to end high school with about 4 or 5 APs. That's just because my time, I mean, in terms of time management, my schedule didn't really allow for any more than that. I had too much. So, total. That's
Oh,
that's
total,
total.
not
No,
just at
that's
once.
total. Yeah.
Are you?
I mean,
Are you? Let's let
Well,
them
okay.
finish. Let's let
I
them
think-
finish. You have
okay,
more to.
it presents a dilemma. We want to solve the stress culture, but people still want to take a lot of APs. I think that it can be addressed in other ways. That's just my
Well, we
opinion.
hear you, and we want to reduce the stress culture too,
And
so
your
let's
suggestions
continue to talk.
are welcome. So I'm going to suggest.
Oh, so we have some more. That
Oh,
was only
you
half
can
the
try to
report.
just.
I'll condense it though.
Great, thanks.
So quickly, going over another way that we like to respond to the issues of stress. Or just adding on to what Charlie was saying. So, at PHS, we also feel that a lot of the school spirit lies in our clubs. This was mentioned in the last meeting. So, Student Council wants to encourage more and more club participation. And personally, I found that, you can develop the best relationships in clubs. Like I've met some of my closest friends. I'm pretty sure Charlie also has as well. We've also noticed that while Student Council is unqualified to address mental health on the medical side, we hope to spend this year partnering with student-run programs like Active Minds, PHS Mental Health Coalition, and PHS March for Our Lives in an effort to lead more effective initiatives to reduce stress and also improve the overall mental health situation at Princeton High School. So now it kind of leads into our third major goal that we set, what Student Council set, which would be restoring school spirit. Charlie mentioned Mr. PHS, which was discontinued past years because it was kind of unsuccessful in terms of the turnout. But we're hoping that, it did draw a big crowd in terms of like the talent portion, beauty portion. Those were all big hits. Let's see what else in here. So, aside from homecoming, we're also really confident that many student council events that are currently in the works will be a success, including possible school-wide sports tournaments. Mentioning this, last time we talked about like the spike ball tournament. At least I mentioned that. That was a big hit last year. And then I think we could talk about just wrapping up now. To wrap up, first we have homecoming that's approaching. So we've decided on themes for each day of the week. And then we have obviously all these themes that culminate into our annual pep rally. And then that's also followed by the Friday Night Lights football game. Hopefully you all attend.
October 11th.
Yes, October 11th, Friday night. Every class has a responsibility for that. And then that basically concludes our first report for the 2019-2020 school year.
Thank you very much. And if you ever want to provide those comments to us in writing, I'm sure we'd all enjoy. Wonderful. Well, leave them for us. It's really good to hear from you. I'm going to make a radical suggestion since it's 11 o'clock. If we could dispense with our committee reports and potentially and we send them to each other perhaps in writing. Does that make? Send them to Matt. Send them to Matt to be posted. Yeah, great. Okay, that's great. Next, we have a public forum on agenda items only if anyone wishes to speak. If no one wishes to speak, we're going to keep going. We're on policies. We have a first reading into consent item. So I'm just going to, when things are consent items, I'm just going to move through them. If anyone has something they'd like. Greg, you want to say something quickly, or are you okay?
Sure, just very quickly. I think we sent out a summary of, there's 8 policies from the 4000 series. We actually heard from Debbie about a suggestion for one of them, and we can put that in for second reading. It's just adding a definition. And then the 9th policy that's up for everyone's review is a very technical change in our bylaws that Matt is recommending in the amount of money for in-state professional development conferences.
Okay, we're going to go now to personnel. Personnel, item L. We have 4 items under this, and they are all action items, but we could do them all at once through a roll call. Does anyone have any questions on any of the items 1 through 4 in personnel? No. Okay. Would you like to do a roll call, please? Oh, we need a motion. Can I have a motion? Michelle?
I move approval of these personnel items 1 through 4.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Dan? Thank you. Roll call vote?
You got Dan? Oh,
Yep. Michelle and Dan.
got it. Beth Barrand,
Yes.
Debbie Bronfeld,
Yes.
Dan Dart,
Yes.
Bill Hare,
Yes.
Betsy Baglio,
Yes.
Brian McDonald,
Yes.
Greg Stankiewicz.
Yes.
Michelle Tuck-Ponder,
Yes.
Evelyn Spahn.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Okay, thank you. We will now move on to item M, curriculum and instruction. We have a number of consents. I will just read them. If anyone wants to make a comment, interrupt me and we will listen. Number 1, curriculum adoption, pre-K creative curriculum. Number 2, purchase of materials, creative curriculum for preschool. Number 3, preschool private provider contract. Number 4, educational consulting services. Number 5, student day field trips. That's an action item. The field trips are an action item. I will,
That's consent. I'll change that
That's
after the
consent,
fact.
I
That sh-
think,
that
right? That should
should
be a
not be,
consent.
that's a consent agenda
All right.
item, unless someone had asked, but I
No, I
don't believe,
don't think so.
yes.
and then student overnight trips, number 6. Okay, we're going to keep going. Now we're in N. These are more consent items. 1, the Educational Services Commission, nursing services. Number 2, educational placement of special ed pupils. Number 3, professional consulting services. Number 4, commission for the blind. Number 5, professional consulting. Number 6, educational placement. Number 7, settlement agreement. And that brings us to O, the financial reports. Number 1. Number 2, purchase of a passenger bus. Number 3, joint transportation agreement with Lawrence Township. Number 4, Burlington County Scholastic League. Number 5, fire and evacuation drills. Number 6, travel requests. And that's it.
For number 6?
Yep.
Can you just point out that it's just going down to Atlantic City, we're not going to Paris or
Oh,
anywhere else?
that's for our,
For the
it's our school board convention,
good
yeah,
point,
where we,
convention, not just.
where we.
It's not.
we
And
spend a
please
lot of-
remember, if you are attending, to abstain from your own travel when the vote's
So
called.
that is an action item.
I had to tell Matt.
I'm not sure we'll have a quorum if we do that.
You can vote yes and then abstain just on your own
On your
travel.
own personal,
Yes,
got
correct.
it.
Yes.
So do we have to align for everyone?
Can,
It's Just when your name's called, just say yes and abstain on my own travel.
do we need to,
That's fine.
and are we taking action on that specifically, or can it be in the consent?
else's travel.
I would do it.
Yes,
Okay,
but I
so let's-
abstain from my travel.
Right.
We're gonna do that one now, it's an action item. Can I have a motion on the travel request? Greg, a second. Bill? All in favor, show of hands?
No, you
Oh,
have
no,
to
we
go
go,
roll call.
we're gonna do roll call.
Beth Barron,
Yes, but I abstain on my own travel.
Debbie Bronfeld,
Yes, but I abstain on my own travel.
Dan Dart.
Yes, I'm not abstaining.
Okay. Excellent. Bill Hare,
Not abstaining because I'm not traveling.
Betsy Baglio,
Yes, but I abstain from my own travel.
Brian McDonald,
Yes.
Greg Stankiewicz,
Yes, but I'm abstaining on my own travel.
Michelle Tuck Ponder,
Yes.
Evelyn Spahn.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Then we'll continue with our consent item 7, travel and related expenses. And then we are at the consent vote.
Can I ask that item N, as in Nancy 7, be removed? I wasn't here for the discussion.
And 7.
N7.
Yeah,
Let me just
Okay.
note that. That's no problem.
Okay.
I will reflect that.
thank you.
And can I just mention, a number of the items on this part of the consent agenda are part of our preschool
Yes.
expansion that will start October 1st. We had to make a number of purchases here, so there's
Thank
been a
you.
lot of work to get that up and running, and it's very exciting. We're
It is. We don't.
on our way.
Hate to rush through that. It's important. So I think we're going to take the consent vote by roll call. May I have a motion? Bill, second. Yeah. Evelyn, second.
Hold on one second. Why am I on this?
So we're on P.
Annoying. Okay.
So we need a roll call vote on P, on the consent.
Who was the motion?
It was Bill and Evelyn.
And Evelyn. Beth Barron,
Yes.
Debbie Bronfeld,
Yes.
Dan Dart,
Yes.
Bill Hare,
Yes.
Betsy Baglio,
Yes.
Brian McDonald,
Yes.
Greg Stankiewicz,
Yes.
Michelle Tuck Ponder,
Yes.
with the one abstention, and Evelyn Spahn.
Yes.
Consent agenda passes.
Thank you. That brings us to public comment on open topics.
But you still have to vote on N7.
Where's N7?
N7, we, with the settlement agreement, because I want to abstain.
Yes, I reflected that. So, yes, that's why I said Michelle is
Oh,
yes.
You said abstain from N7.
Yeah, but I said that a
We
yes,
got you.
and I will, in the official vote, you will be
Thank you
abstained.
I'm on
for your care. Okay, public, do we have anyone who wants a public comment on open topics? If so,
Please don't hate me forever. I will be really, really quick, I promise.
state your name and address.
Raisa, 360 Jefferson Road. Hi, everyone. I just really quickly wanted to follow up on the comment about potentially looking into capping APs. I just wanted to encourage the board to continue that dialogue and to include students in the process, because I think it's a really interesting process. There's a lot of aspects to explore, but there's also a lot of misconceptions out there about that. For instance, my understanding is that if we did put a cap on APs, it actually would not harm any students in the college process, because colleges would take that into account when they were looking at students and their situation in terms of how many APs they would be able to take. So I think that it's a really good conversation to have, and we should definitely look into it. And we have an impeding, very difficult, a lot of mental health issues going on at our high school, and they need to be addressed immediately, and we need to look at big solutions. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Raisa. Any other members wishing to comment? Oh, someone's coming.
We're coming up together so we can condense this. So,
Make it quicker.
hi, my name is Jennifer Basin, and
I'm Kelly Bonero.
we both teach at Riverside School, and we are here tonight to report about the challenges surrounding the opening of Riverside School this year. Specifically, the physically unhealthy environment created by summer construction, and the fact that teachers were given the green light to work in this dangerous environment. The lack of action when teachers complained about their health and the environment, and finally, the initiation and the responsibility for the cleanup and the ongoing progress. While much of this situation may have been resolved, we would be remiss if the details were not made very clear to inform future construction projects. First of all, staff members should never have been allowed to enter an active construction site. But like every year, we were taking pride and ownership preparing our classrooms for children. Immediately, staff members became sick. They realized the conditions of the building and contacted the district about health concerns. I should be clear that more than 20 teachers experienced and reported similar health concerns that were respiratory problems, sore throats, headaches, and burning skin. When contacted about their concerns, staff members were told the building was safe.
The facts are simple. Actions were not taken on the part of the district until after Mr. Harding walked around with members of the staff and the health department was called. When the health department deemed the space unsafe, only then did the district take action. We as a staff are concerned that this was not addressed proactively, but rather reactively. So I ask you, why was it that the staff it had to come down to the staff calling the health department? The optics and the actions are disheartening, disrespectful, and dangerous. We request that future construction consider these concerns and ensure that health and safety of the staff and the students are priority. There are still issues with these HVAC systems, including flooding in classrooms, systems that do not work at all, or systems that aren't able to regulate the temperatures in the classrooms.
We encourage you to take these concerns of our staff seriously. Is the new normal for our staff members to assume inaction, which forces us to solve problems in a different way? We hope not.
In closing, I hope that you all agree that when a group of teachers, instructional assistants, or custodians voice their concerns, that their message is taken seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, can you put that in writing?
It is.
It is, we got it, you're gonna give it
We
to
will
us?
email it.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, can we comment or something? I want to know what we are doing on
Well-
that, because that's really
let's
hard,
listen.
that's really
Debbie?
awful to hear.
I'm following
Oh,
up.
yeah.
Okay,
We-
so
Okay.
I'm from Riverside also, and then we can maybe
Okay,
all
sure,
We
discuss
don't, we just
together.
need to observe,
So-
listening first and then.
Yeah. My name's Amanda Nichols. I'm Riverside, 5th grade. I'm also a PREA member and represent my school. It is my understanding that the school board is the final word in a district. Although a board gets much of its information from the administrators, it is ultimately the board members' responsibility to know what is going on in the school community they have been elected to serve. From the perspective of a teacher within the school system, it appears as though there is a disconnect between what board members and the community think is happening and what is actually happening. The board appears to be out of touch with what is going on within the Princeton Public Schools. Why did members of the board not know of the status of the referendum work taking place at Riverside School as staff tried to prepare for the opening of school? Why was no one from the board pushing for answers, a plan B, and ensuring the building was healthy and safe for teachers and students? Why was it the teachers who had to sound the alarm and push for answers? And if the board was aware, why was there not any communication with staff and the community about what steps were being taken to ensure the safety and well-being of students and staff? Why is it the board is not asking why teachers do not have the basic supplies to teach the children in their care? Why are there not enough math materials at every grade level for the new Ready Math program to be delivered with fidelity to students? Why are teachers and students continually frustrated by computer problems that impact equitable access to student learning? How is it possible for supervisors to refuse to respond to teachers' questions regarding program implementation? How is a supervisor able to say to staff, "I will not respond to any email until after September 30th"? Why are there more administrators and supervisors but less communication and clarity of purpose for staff? As a teacher, as teachers, we are required to show up, be prepared, and deliver a fair, differentiated, and equitable program to our students. We are expected to meet our deadlines. Why are the people we answer to not held to the same standard? Members of the board need to dig deeper, look more closely, and ask tough questions in order to be able to honestly say to the people who elected them that they are on top of what is going on in the Princeton Public Schools.
Hi, I'll be quick. Bob Corral, I teach science at the high school. Two quick things, one based on what was said tonight and one from the last meeting. The thing from tonight is, earlier in the meeting tonight, much earlier, there was reference quite often to how Riverside opened only one day late. But understand, it only opened one day late for the students. The teachers were in there for several days. And when you say that it only opened one day late, it meant that you planned to have the teachers in there while construction was going on. Now, maybe that's not what you implied, but these people who are getting sick, that's what they're going to hear, and words do matter. All right, so that's all I'm going to say on that. My second thing is, I asked a question at the last meeting, and nobody got back to me. And my question is, what for the 2019-20 year with the sidebar agreement is the effective percentage raise for the PAA? And I will come back every month and ask this question until somebody gives me an answer. Thank you.
Any further questions? You wanna say anything?
Can I just quickly comment on the lady from, at one of our meetings, and this really pisses me off, and I don't get pissed off a lot. I said, board members are elected, and if something goes wrong with this referendum, they're gonna come to us, because we're the ones. I said, we need to have someone assigned to each project, each school. And I was told that was administrative. And here we have someone come in and say, why weren't you there? And the reason we weren't there is because we were told we'd be administering the district and we can't do it. And it was a mistake then, it's still a mistake. We should have one person at PHS, one person at Riverside, one person at Little Brook, someone who can walk in and say, boy, there's dust everywhere at Little Brook. Or can walk in and say, I love the air conditioner, it's great for the swimming pool at Riverside. In the classroom, it was a mistake then and it's still a mistake and we need to do it differently. And it just pisses me off that we have people coming and saying this. And I'm not the smartest guy, but it was kind of easy to say we need to be there. And I was told no, enough.
I am so sorry that, I wish you guys had come the other meeting we had too. I'm very, very sorry for Riverside. I'm really frustrated too because we sat in 2 meetings on Tuesday. I need dates. And, it was before Labor Day. It was a meeting in the morning, meeting at night, and I was told, wow, they're doing great work, they're gonna be done. And literally Thursday morning, there was some scary thing that happened, and they couldn't get in. And I, as a board member, asked and asked and asked what was going on, where everything was. So I will take no blame for this one, but I'm pushing this on administration, or I'm pushing it on Epic, who is gone. We need answers from them, because I am really sad for these people that they felt sick, that they had to go to the health department. We are not protecting them.
We're in public comment, and we took comments, excuse me, Debbie, but we're really not supposed to engage, that's our policy. So
I do want to say that it was not the day before. For at least 2 weeks prior to the opening of school, myself and a number of other teachers were sounding the alarm, and finally on that Thursday morning went looking for help and answers and called the health department.
Okay, thank you for coming.
Can I ask who she gave the alarm to?
I think that we need to, procedurally, we don't normally engage with this, and so I think we need to move along with the agenda. How do we respond to that? Steve, would you like to?
I can't listen to teachers talk about how much pain they were in and not say, I'm sorry. We have talked about this before. I know, Amanda, when you came to the PREA session, we sort of went through the timeline. And I'll reiterate it for the two of you, for Kelly and Jen. There was a plan. There was teachers and administrators coming together to look at the schedule of cleaning of those rooms and figuring out when teachers could get into those classrooms, because we knew that the timeline for construction and the timeline for getting those classrooms ready the way you wanted them was overlapping. And so there was a clearly laid out plan that the custodian at Riverside and the principal at Riverside and teachers and Dave Harding, our director of facilities, all came together, and they figured out a plan for cleaning the rooms and getting teachers into those rooms that were clean. That plan was working as far as we knew until Tuesday, which was the board meeting on August 27th. And we actually got a message from Mark during the board meeting. I got an email saying things are moving along, the rooms are clean, it looks like we're going to be in good shape. That was on Tuesday. Wednesday was the first official day back for teachers, on the 28th, and that was when we started to uncover that the rooms that we thought were clean, the contractors had gone back into, people were opening up cupboards and realizing that things weren't properly covered. Like, there were things that came out after we thought we had a plan in place and a good way of getting teachers into that building. On Thursday, we had the convocation, and afterwards, Riverside had their meeting in the high school cafeteria, the PAC. Dave Harding and I were there. We saw the hands go up of those teachers and assistants, those staff who complained of not feeling well. I turned to Dave in that meeting and said, we need to get a professional cleaning crew in here. We need to do air quality testing. We need to get on that right away. People ask me, what is your plan B? And I said, I need to talk to my board president and facilities chair and vice president about what the plan is going to be. I need to talk to the county superintendent about whether I can close one school and open the rest of the district. But we will come up with a plan. So we went ahead and moved forward with calling cleaning firms to come in. At the same time, I know teachers called the health department, which was fine. They all arrived at Riverside that afternoon, and they walked the building. But there was a response at that time, and I wish it had happened earlier, but when we saw those 23 hands go up, it was immediate. And that was when I met with Brian, with Greg, with Beth. We mapped out what the plan was going to be. And we have since that time been documenting the lessons learned, going through detailed lessons of, maybe we don't use the soffits with and we use a different kind of, so we don't have the air, the dust from the gypsum board and everything, is maybe we wrap up, we do the bidding much earlier, so we get finished the beginning of August, so we don't have any overlap of teachers and construction. Using the Tupperware containers at the beginning of the year, sealing everything up, like those are the plans that I know that the facilities committee is asking about on a regular basis, so that when we go into the other schools, other staff members don't have to go through what you did. And I am truly sorry that you did, and I know how much time teachers put in late at night over the Labor Day weekend trying to get, these rooms ready for the start of school, and I'm grateful. But I want you to know that there is care on the part of the administration, there's care on the part of this board. There was a plan that teachers were a part of in developing. It, for a variety of reasons, it did not work, and we responded as quickly as we could when we learned of that.
Thank you. Greg?
Just very briefly, as chair of the facilities, I just want to also reiterate, we are sorry for everything the Riverside went through, and what we're trying to do is make sure that as we install the AC units in all the other schools, we put in place the lessons learned, and to make sure that doesn't happen again. We have some benefits for the other schools in that Riverside, by going first, we were up against a very tight deadline. And the other schools, we don't have that tight deadline. We can plan, plus we have the lessons learned there. And so we're going to make sure that we build in a much more of a buffer. And so we're also taking other lessons learned, as Steve said as well. So what I want to say personally is I'm sorry for everything you went through. I applaud, though, what I saw on Thursday afternoon when I and Brian as facilities people came in to help with the planning. What we saw was a real insistence on making sure that the school would be safe for teachers and for students, and the decision was made with the principal to put off the opening at Riverside by one day in order to allow teachers to have an extra time to prepare as much as possible. And so the news was sent out as soon as possible to the parents as well at Riverside. So that's my perspective from the board. And I just want to reiterate again as well that for me, one of the outcomes is the importance of working together on this as we continue to go through the referendum projects, because it's not an easy process, but it's an important process, and we hope that at the end of it, the ability to say that we have better conditions for everybody, and we can put in place things like, for example, having professional cleaning done and built into the process going forward, and allowing that buffer in time so that, your fellow teachers and our students in the other elementary schools and in the middle school and in the high school will be able to enjoy the benefits of the HVAC units.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying
Can
through
I
this
just ask,
long
when
meeting.
did you guys go to the health service? What day? Thursday?
We went Thursday morning. We had actually left the building to go find Steve, to ask him to come back to the meeting with the staff.
Mhm.
And on the
This was
way,
Thursday.
I was driving